This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Naruto was trained by Dragon of the West. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. No wasting no time. Let's start the story.
In the Valley of the End, a hero. Over time and space, the description of a hero has always evolved. Some of the men were powerful but extremely avaricious. Some were naive teenagers with compassion. Some were attractive, powerful women who battled to the death. Due to their years of experience, some were elderly and wise beyond their years. The seventh Hokage of Konohagakure, Uzumaki Naruto, combined the second and fourth explanations. Naruto was always oblivious to the world around him as a child. He never imagined that his village's villains would genuinely have good intentions. He only wanted to be loved and fight. He was always apprehensive about making such tough choices. This was the price he paid. He was lying on the ground beside his friend Uchiha Sasuke, who had passed away. They were both so exhausted that they were completely overwhelmed by it. He never imagined that his best friend would attempt something so ludicrous as destroying a village that cherished him. Like Naruto, he paid a terrible price for allowing his anger to rule his behavior. Most people would consider the battle that took place in this valley to be legendary. Momentous moments after the other, flashing lights from both of their most powerful techniques clashing throughout the area. Such a battle could only be described by explosions and chaos. This was the battle between two men who were superior to Kage. Recalling the words he had spoken to him, Naruto turned to face the man he had once thought of as a friend. The exact words he had spoken to him were, "Even if we do end up dying, at least we'll no longer be Uchiha and the Kyuubi. Not burdened by any of that, we'll be able to truly understand one another in the next world." He still considered him a friend after all this time. Naruto had no idea what it meant. Perhaps this was the price paid for attempting to be heroic. Ultimately, if a ninja attempted to be heroic, only tragedy and death would await them. Similar to Jiraiya, his father, and the third Hokage. Unfortunately, he would be put on the list with them. With a resigned sigh, he tried to muster the remaining strength. Sasuke. You awake there?" He didn't get a response right away, but he only needed to grunt to be sure he was awake. With a slight tilt of his head, the man with black hair chose to respond. "What?" he asked, his frustration and fatigue evident in his tone. He smiled cheekily and said, "Looks like we're dead. Told ya so." Unable to understand how his old best friend, the only man he could possibly respect, could smile at this moment, Sasuke can only gaze up at the sky in amazement. They were slowly but painfully passing away. For Sasuke, it was the worst way to pass away. He felt terrible about what he had done, but he never felt regret for it. He was aware that neither of them could be saved, so he said, "Well, at least you will be going first." Therefore, he would at least prevent the fool from enjoying the satisfaction of living longer than he did. It was always a competition between the two, regardless of the circumstances. Despite his desire to laugh, Naruto's beaten state prevented him from doing so. He was overcome with nostalgia for the times when Sasuke was closer to sanity. Vibrantly, Naruto replied, "We'll see, you bastard. We'll see." With a grunt, Sasuke accepted the blonde Hokage's last challenge. Naruto smiled. It really was just like old times. The woodland. A young woman with pink hair said, "Hurry up, sensei." Madara said they were here. She was sprinting through the forest at speeds that were impossible to see with the human eye. Her voice betrayed her concern. Why? Her best friend and her ex-lover were engaged in a death-defying battle. The situation would frighten anyone in their right mind. Together with the Alliance's leaders, they had vanquished Madara and informed him of the situation. "I know." She could tell he was equally concerned, but there was something in his voice that nearly made her cry. As if he was hiding something from her because he knew or figured it out. It would only divert her attention, so she didn't feel like asking. "Please. I'm almost there," she mentally exclaimed. Unwilling to acknowledge that the chakra had long since died. Kakashi was also aware of this and its truth. They arrived only to find both bodies lying there still. Neither was able to speak. 10 minutes prior. Naruto calmly asked, "You still there?" Sensing that his time was running out, he made the decision to say his last words to his opponent. However, there was no response this time. He began to feel dread. To check on him, he called his name once more. "Sasuke." With every call, the sorrow and anguish in his voice progressively increased. After a few more, the realization of his victory caused his eyes to sting. He had no intention of winning it. He wanted to pass away first, but it appeared that he was mistaken, always wrong about his best friend. Naruto couldn't even feel the tears streaming down his face. "Sasuke, damn it, you can't be dead already," he said. At last, the truth had hit him like a lightning strike. He was alone once more after the death of his best friend. He was reminded of the terror of loneliness by himself. Gazing up at the sky, he recalled his teams and his own memories. The laughter, the smiles. Compared to how he felt now, it was the greatest feeling in the world. He began to sob quietly, and when he could take it no more, he let it all out. The pent-up grief and regrets he has experienced throughout his life. He could feel the light disappearing from his vision more and more each minute. "I win," was a voice that was filled with pain rather than joy. Never to see daylight again, he closed his eyes. At least in this world. Unknown region. When Naruto realized he was still alive, his eyes popped open. He was lying on what appeared to be a mountain path. Perhaps this was heaven, he thought, bewildered. He smiled as he thought. He moaned in agony as he attempted to stand. For some reason, the pain from the battle was still with him here, but it would go away in a short while. Even though his chakra was full, he could still feel the Kyuubi. His body felt a glimmer of hope. Was he still alive, perhaps? The blonde said, "Weird place." The trees around her were black and white in color. Naruto had a strange feeling and thought the mountain trail led upward. Perhaps this was hell because he had no idea what heaven looked like. That would be terrible, he sighed. When Naruto heard a roar coming from the top of the road, he stopped his progress. He was shocked to see the scene, but he hurried there right away to investigate. He was dwarfed by a black dragon with building-sized fangs. The beast had blood-red slits and dark eyes. He was likely 7 times as large as the Hokage building overall. At the sight of the creature, Naruto sensed the Kyuubi shuddering, in excitement rather than fear. Unable to hide his bewildered expression, the blonde nodded. "You are Uzumaki Naruto? I would like to ask of your help. You see, my colleagues have all picked a pupil to train, but I haven't. And well, I need you to be my pupil." Naruto was nearly chuckling. The ferocious creature before him sounded almost uneasy. "What's the catch?" Naruto now took offense at the statement. "I'm gonna make you young again. How old does this thing think he is?" He was 23 years old, for crying out loud. He even had a youthful appearance. The dragon sighed, seeing his offended expression. "I meant younger than you are now. You see, my friends have been waging bets on which of their pupils will be the best, and you look like a really fast learner. Their pupils are mostly around the age of 4.15, so I'm gonna make you 12 again for now." Naruto gave a nod. He chose to comply because he felt that his life had been cut short. He needed a way to move on from his past and wasn't the kind to turn down an offer like this. The dragon, who already liked the child in front of him, grinned and said, "Sure, why not?" Naruto nodded, eager to begin his new life. "The name's Tridante's kid. I'm the dragon of the west and the traveler of the night. A new beginning." Since he wouldn't be seeing his family for a while, it made him both happy and sad. Naruto thought, they could wait a bit longer. They wouldn't be happy about me dying at age 23 anyway. The dragon nodded and got to work on his training right away. "Let's get this party started, sensei." Naruto became aware that the dragon was regenerating his youth as he felt his body shrink. "Let's see how fast you learn, boy." Naruto then embarked on his new training schedule, eager to pick up new abilities and looking forward to a fresh experience. After 3 years, not bad at all. From his hilltop vantage point, Tridantes, the western dragon and traveler of the starry night, watched his pupil complete the final portion of his training. The blonde had matured significantly since he was 12. The blonde's state made the black dragon snort with laughter. Not even a dragon like him would see a 26-year-old man in a 15-year-old's body that frequently. He sighed. Naruto still hadn't finished his last technique, and it was time to leave. Perhaps the blonde wasn't his ideal pupil after all. BRRROM or not, the child had impeccable timing. He smiled as broadly as he could, flew to his student, and took one last, serious look at his masterwork. The 5'11" blonde was dressed in a black leather armor with shoulder pads and sleeves that hung below his elbows on his left side and no sleeves on his right. In addition, he wore a gray sash around his waist and loose-fitting black pants. Naruto sighed. "Done, I see. You're definitely a fast learner, boy." He was stuck with that moniker even after hanging out with the Elder Dragon for 3 years. However, he was pleasantly surprised by the physical enhancement that the anti-dragon training provided. All the training compensated for the more than half of his techniques that he lost. After his first year of training, he had been hit by the effects of being in a different dimension. He began abruptly losing his recollections of his past, which led to the incident. At first, it wasn't much of an issue, but the blonde became alarmed when he began to lose his ninjutsu skills. Additionally, he didn't want to forget his longtime pals, including Sakura, Sai, Shikamaru, and others. When Naruto finally forgot, he was compelled to jot down his memories in order to recall them later. Unfortunately, he lost all the other moves he knew, including Sage Mode, Rasengan, Kage Bunshin, and a few dozen wind, water techniques. At the time, he was more concerned with his friend's memories than with methods. Fortunately, he was still able to use his sealing abilities and affix his memories to a medium using a bounding seal. The necklace of Tsunade. In other words, the memories would last as long as he wore the necklace around his neck. That week was unquestionably the scariest Naruto has experienced in his 20.6 years of life. The foolish dragon responded with, "You didn't ask, and didn't even inform him of the memory loss symptom." Naruto was furious like never before, but he decided to ignore it because he only lost expendable memory. The dragon nodded and gave his pupil a proud smile. "Yep, so you're leaving, huh? You did say it was overdue." The information made Naruto sad, but the excitement in his body overcame the sadness. At last, he was going to go out and do missions the way he used to. Although the circumstances were somewhat different, this marked the start of his new beginning. His new self. Tridantes threw a small object at him and said, "Before I leave, I have a gift for you." Naruto grabbed it and gave it a perplexed glance. It was a black gourd with white petal designs that was exquisitely designed. Royal black sake was inside it. The dragon chuckled and instructed him to drink it, asking, "What's this for?" Despite his reluctance, Naruto obeyed and experienced the consequences right away. "Whoa." The dragon greeted him with a laugh. Naruto laughed and recognized its purpose. The sake of the dragons. Night sake. Helps you go to sleep, cures symptoms of depression and fuels your Dragonslayer power. If darkness was ever out of reach, it was for emergencies. He wouldn't take any chances, even though that scenario was extremely unlikely. After all, this world was a mystery to him. The dragon gazed at him as though he had just said the most brilliant thing ever. Awesome. What happens when it runs out? The implications his master had just given him caused Naruto to collapse in frustration. Without hesitation, Tridantes burst out laughing and gave the blonde a gentle pat on the pinky. Naruto nodded and grinned at his teacher, saying, "Just howl at the sky and come back here a week after it runs out. I'll have someone deliver it to ya." With tears in his eyes, he said, "So, this is goodbye." He was like a third father to him, even though he was a jerk sometimes. He gave Naruto a farewell pat on the back, causing him to fly 20 feet backwards at the impact. He laughed at his student's expense one last time before taking off into the night and vanishing into the sky. For now. Remember, don't tell any other Dragonslayer the secret. Perched atop the hilltop, Naruto gazed at the shape of his vanishing master, shedding a few tears before he quickly forgot about it and went to retrieve his traveling gear. Naruto gave his master's gourd a final glance and smiled sincere before his mind finally clicked. Hold on. What, secret, damn it, he tricked me again. He screamed at the sky and cursed his master, furious at his neglect. He did not hear his master laughing from a distance. I love messing with that kid. After a week, Naruto was worn out. He was so excited that he had been traveling non-stop for a whole week. When he finally collapsed in a heap directly in front of the town he had been aiming for, his hyperactivity proved to be his undoing. Magnolia is where Fairy Tail, the Mage Guild, is based. He became interested after learning that there were rumors of another Dragonslayer present. Battle was brewing in his veins. He was addicted to fighting because of the blood in his veins, regardless of whether he was a shinobi or a mage. His desire to get up and run to the guild was strong. But he couldn't get his legs to listen. He looked up and saw a woman with dark blue eyes and brown hair. "Are you okay?" he asked. She was dressed in knee-high black shorts and a bikini top. She had a very noticeable tattoo on her lower body. "That's one sexy tattoo you got there." "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks for asking, miss." She grinned at the remark. "Kana." She nodded and proudly displayed her tattoo, saying, "I'm Naruto." "Hey, I recognize that tattoo. Are you part of Fairy Tail?" She had no qualms about flaunting her guild wherever she went because she genuinely loved it more than anything else. He nodded, so she took out one of her cards and asked, "Yep, you a mage?" "Let me help ya." He struck his legs after briefly seeing her cards glow majestically in red and green. Magic cards. Queen of Hearts. He felt the weariness instantly go away as the glow encircled his legs. He got to his feet and gazed at her in wonder. He laughed as he recalled how he and Tsunade used to play poker every Friday night. "Hey, that's awesome. I didn't know you could do that with cards." Kana gave him a questioning glance. Naruto grinned and asked, "What exactly can you do with cards?" She laughed at the joke, "Win money." Seeing his excitement, she suppressed a laugh and said, "So you're a mage, huh?" Come on, I'll show you to the guild. He was similar to Natsu, but quieter and more fascinating. Naruto lowered his hands to his chins in a contemplative position and asked, "So where'd you come from?" Kana raised an eyebrow slightly in curiosity at the ambiguous response, "A small town near the west." "Which one?" Naruto's eyes darkened instantly. After noticing it, Kana felt bad about posing the query. Kana patted him on the back and nodded her head, saying, "I don't know the name, but Deliora destroyed it when I was a kid. Sorry if I..." His smile caught her off guard. "No worries, now I'm here. It's all in the past." She chose to change the topic without interrogating. Naruto let out a sigh of relief and asked himself, "So what's your magic?" Although he disliked lying, he was incredibly skilled at it. The fox rarely spoke, but when he did, it was usually a sarcastic remark. "Yep, congratulations, brat. You fooled another human with no skills in reading another. Real skills." So he gave his typical response. The fox snorted, but he obeyed, saying, "Go back to sleep before I shove a Rasen Shuriken up your ass." Naruto let out a sigh. He was a huge pain in the ass even after being tamed. She was irritated by the response but gave in. My that's a secret hee." She paused and gazed up at the structure that she thought of as her second home. She and the blonde both grinned broadly as she said, "And here it is. Welcome to Fairy Tail." Naruto gazed in wonder and amazement at the structure. As soon as he brought his bags into the guild, he exclaimed, "It's huge, man. This is going to be fun." He noticed that many people were eating and chatting like regular people. When Naruto first saw the request board, he was struck by how large it was. He would never again be broke. All eyes were on him at once when he said, "Oi, master. We have a newbie here trying out for the guild. His name is Naruto." Fully accustomed to being the center of attention, he waved to everyone with a million-watt smile. Naruto was briefly grabbed by an elderly man who said, "A new guy, huh? Let's see what you got." The smaller man, Midget, had so much magical power that Naruto couldn't help but notice it. It was comparable to the quantity Kisame possessed in the past, possibly even greater because he was suppressing the majority of it. Naruto shuddered a little. If this man, Midget's magical abilities could compete with those of Kisame and perhaps Nagato, the seventh path of Pain Master, then he was unquestionably in charge. 1. "Welcome to Fairy Tail, young man. I can tell you've got some experience in those eyes of yours." Naruto gave a nod. Makarov looked at the young man in front of him and put his hands to his chin in a contemplative position. "Well then, you can take jobs anytime you want, but notify me or the front desk first." Even though he was keeping all of his magic power hidden, it was still incredibly powerful. He noticed that his S-ranked mages, with the exception of Mistgun, who wasn't there, were thinking the same thing when he looked upstairs. Gazing up at the top floor, he noticed Gildarts rubbing his head and sighing. Kana found a good one. His magical energy is so light on the outside, but it's also dark somewhere inside. Not to mention his dark powers outnumbers his light in quantity. Gildarts was whispering to himself. "Oh yeah, you need the mark. Oimira," the white-haired teen said, frowning as she approached Naruto while holding a stamp. After giving it some thought, Naruto smiled and asked, "Where?" Ignoring her blushing face, he lifted his shirt and gestured to his stomach. It was right next to his seal. She obeyed, nodding. Makarov nodded, grinned broadly, and leapt to the top floor, saying, "Sweet. Oi, we're having a welcoming party today. Get the drinks out," was a shout of excitement from everyone as the celebration began. Later that evening, the roof of Fairy Tail Naruto enjoyed the party. Since he had never had time for it before, he hadn't laughed and drunk like that in a long time. For him and his friends, it was always taking lives, day or night. Getting up to speed with his best friends, genius, required him to undergo endless training. He would have cracked eventually, but he passed away before then. He smiled appreciatively as he glanced down at his new guild. He picked up the gourd tied to his waist and examined it, recalling the gift from his master. He sipped it and said to himself, "To a new beginning." He could feel the strength of the night boosting him right away. Darkness's strength coursing through his body. A few days later, the Fairy Tail lobby. "Team." Makarov gave a nod. He had just given their newest guild member an explanation of the advantages of working as a team. Naruto scanned the room, attempting to determine each person's unique spiritual potency. He needed teammates who were good enough to keep him safe because he wanted to hit the B and A ranked missions right away. Going solo was a possibility, but because he was new, the master had disapproved of the idea altogether. Naruto remembered Kana's card tricks and immediately added her to his team's list of potentials. Given her healing move and his assumption that she was a mid to long-range fighter, he had no trouble working with her. He still needed a support-type member to stand by and defend him in battle if necessary, based on his observations of the room. The fundamental idea behind putting together a team was that you always needed insurance in case something went wrong. The mission to wave back when he was a child was a clear indication that there was no such thing as a guaranteed victory in the field. Because they were given false information, the straightforward C-rank mission became an A-rank one, almost killing them all. Makarov began to stroke his beard as he considered the younger man's request. "Hey boss, are there any support-type magic users around?" he asked. His fingers snapped, and he swiped a small, green book into his hands as he thought of a solution. The gesture raised the blonde's eyebrows. Naruto nodded and observed that it was the guild registry for Fairy Tail, which included a list of members and their general details. "Look through here. For instance, their magic type, likes and dislikes." He was pleasantly surprised by his new guild's versatility after witnessing the skills of each of their mage members. They had medical professionals, defense experts, and powerhouses. When he read about one of their mages employing enchantment magics, he became particularly intrigued. In a way, he thought, it was like the art of sealing in his former world. He paused while flipping through the D sections and noticed a name and ability that caught his attention. Makarov nodded and said, "Dragneel Natsu, the Fire Dragon Slayer. Interesting and rare." When he first joined the guild, he had never thought a young child could have such rare magic. Naruto grinned as he glanced at the rosy-headed boy across the room, who was presumably curious about his master's whereabouts. Tridantes followed his own rules, which was fortunate for his master Naruto. The dragon kept his plans a secret from the blonde, but he had a sneaking suspicion that it was something significant because it had been withheld for so long. Naruto laughed when he saw Natsu wreaking havoc on his teammates and destroying the area with fire-based attacks, saying, "He is a very good powerhouse type. Kid may go overboard a bit, but he's still a solid member." The older man concurred and laughed, saying, "Those types tend to get into the most trouble." The blonde's words contained a good deal of truth. He was impressed by the boy's ability to classify the members' benefits and drawbacks as he watched him read about them. Naruto grinned as he searched the lobby for her and said, "Lucky Alieta, wood-based magic." When he saw she was not there, he frowned. After pondering for a few minutes, he sighed and shook his head. "Hey boss, where's Lucky?" Knowing exactly what it was like to do that, Naruto nodded and said, "She's still on a mission. I don't usually do this, but can you go back her up? Lucky tends to get in over her head often. He typically took on more than he could manage as a child and frequently failed. But in the end, it improved him." The old man pulled out a piece of paper with the words, "Devil Extermination," on the top, and he asked, "What mission is she on?" The reward for killing a roving monster in the south was 400,000 jewels. Makarov nodded and reiterated that she frequently found herself in difficult situations that were beyond her capabilities. "Interesting pick. It's a B-rank quest." The older man nodded, already suspecting his intentions, and said, "Okay, I'll be there in no time. I was planning on asking her to be on my team anyway." He looked to his top floor to find his grandson, Luxus, as soon as he saw the blonde leave the lobby and out of earshot. The man leapt to his feet and turned to face his grandfather, saying, "Luxus, I have a job for ya." He was blonde and wore large yellow headphones that, from a distance, might have been mistaken for his ears. He sighed as he turned to face his grandson and asked, "What do you need, Gramps?" He saw him try to slip out through the second-story window a short while ago, probably to follow the new guy in the guild. Luxus nodded, validating the elder man's suspicions about his grandson. "I know you're just as interested as I am about his magic. Can you follow him?" Luxus asked. The older man suspected that he would have done so with or without his permission. Luckily for Luxus, Makarov was interested, too. "Sure, why not?" he asked with a sly smile before darting out of the room. The master sighed. At that age, his grandson was even more of a show-off than he was. After 5 hours, Naruto was intelligent. He was aware that someone was pursuing him, and judging from the person's level of magical ability, it was clear that they were a powerful individual. The blonde was unconcerned, as it would only heighten his enigma. It was difficult to be unpredictable all the time, Naruto sighed. He reflected that people simply did not comprehend the amount of stress it caused. "Now, I wonder where she is." He observed the surroundings as he walked to the town from which the client had come. The grounds were littered with black soot, charred grass, and smashed trees. He could see dead animals and the burned remains of several people who had resisted the devil. To his right, Naruto let out a dismaying sigh, relieved that people in his hometown didn't hunt demons in this manner because he might have been dead long ago. Then he heard a scream of pain and abruptly snapped his head to the left. With all of his strength, he ran to the scene of the scream and arrived just in time to witness a teenage girl with violet hair collapse in a heap next to a nearby tree. Naruto recognized her and hurried to check on her in case she required any medical attention. He was extremely relieved to see that none of her wounds were life-threatening or potentially dangerous. With her eyelids half closed, the girl asked, "Are you okay?" She noticed a charming boy with blonde hair doing everything he could to help her recover. She chose to respond, grinning at the gesture. He nodded, sweat dropping at her attempt to articulate her issue. "I'm fine, but that thing picked me apart like a lion does to a mouse when it's locked in a 5x5 cage." The two he chose as teammates were quite strange, but he couldn't help but snicker. She gave a nod in agreement. "Hey, you're part of Fairy Tail, right?" Her eyes widened by a fraction as he smiled and revealed his mark. Her smile was enough for him to say, "Yes. I'm the new guy, Naruto. I joined a few days ago. You need any help?" he asked. He turned around and began to stretch in preparation for the fight. He looked at the so-called devil and smiled, sweat dropping once more at her attempt at a simile. "Be careful, it uses sound magic. It also punches as hard as a tiger on steroids." He had undoubtedly seen worse in his years. For instance, when he battled Itachi and was revived by Kabuto using the renowned Edo Tensei. In his life, that was the 16th most problematic day. Immediately following her encounter with Tamari during her menstrual cycle. She gave a tentative nod, saying, "I'll be fine. This shouldn't take too long." She simply chose to observe him in action after sensing that he was concentrating an unusual amount of magical energy into his right palm. As she watched him approach the monster the size of a small mansion, she noticed that he appeared to be grinning foolishly. He shouted from his position, "Oi, big ugly, come down in here and get it." When fully grown, the monster was as large as the Hokage Tower. Like the ancient Vikings, it has a single large horn affixed to the side of his head. It was in a terrible berserk stage because its eyes were slitted and bloodshot. That, he thought to himself, made fighting easier in the end. The devil responded to the insult with a loud, ear-splitting roar that was so strong that the trees around it broke apart. He glanced at his palms and smiled at his masterpiece, smirking at the monster's attempt to destroy his eardrums. His well-known defense destroyer was superior to the fourth Hokage's. The move that, in a matter of seconds, skewered, tore apart, and shredded Uchiha Sasuke's great Susanoo shield. With a lot of screeching noises, a bowling ball-sized sphere of wind appeared in Naruto's hands during Futon. Odama Rasengan. Wind release. Great ball spiraling sphere. Luxus, who was concealed, regarded the assault with a good deal of interest. He was holding an incredible amount of magical power in his palm, which was so compressed that it could have passed for a sword. The blonde couldn't help but feel anxious as he considered the distance between himself and the monster's face. It would be his first opportunity to use his new darkness, space, time magic. He concentrated his remaining magical energy and tried the first move that Tridantes, his master, had taught him. Kage Isha, shadow projection. Suddenly he saw a door made of majestic darkness. The same one was directly in front of the beast when he looked up. He stepped through the darkness and showed up where the other was, grinning. Directly before the object's face. He then went ahead and slammed his defense killer into its eye, causing a great deal of blood to splash around the area and a loud, agonizing shriek of pain. When he saw that half of the monster's face had been skewered off, leaving only half of an eye and a brain visible, he grinned sadistically at the outcome. What was that? Lucky gazed in wonder at her future teammate. In one instant, the giant was wasted by the move. Like a chainsaw cutting through wood, it sliced through the hard face of the rock. She wiped away the bloodstains and watched him approach her. She nodded, forgetting to inquire about the shadow he had used to teleport to the monster's face. "One of my attacks. Usually, I only use it on big targets like this guy." Luxus, however, was more astute and perceptive than that. He shook his head and left, telling his grandfather about the power he had witnessed the blonde use. A strong wind-based attack like that and a method of instant traveling using shadows. Interesting. He's also clever with the way he positioned his shadows as well. Speaking of shadows. If I didn't know any better, I'd think. He only left a burn mark on the ground that would have served as a reminder of his presence before darting out of the area like a wisp of lightning. "So, Lucky, what do you think about forming a team?" she asked, appearing perplexed as she gazed at him. Naruto looked at her and smiled broadly. Why do you want me to join your team?" she asked. She blushed at his compliment and nodded her head. "Because I think your magic is wonderful. Wood magic has many uses and I heard from the master that you were quite skilled at it." He assumed his thinking posture and sat down comfortably beside her. Well, it's alright. Sure, I guess if you want to form a team. A team is usually made up of 3.5 members. Who else do you have in mind? He asked. She acknowledged his decision by nodding. Kana, and that's it for now. A 3-person cell is good enough since I can't think of any other person. Having witnessed the other woman's fight, Lucky was equally impressed by her abilities. As she went over his options, a sudden realization came to her eyes. You seem to be a planner of sorts. I'm guessing you're making it seem as though you are the powerhouse. I may support while Kana can attack from high and low and mid to long range. It's not a bad idea actually. Naruto chuckled at her tiny deduction. After all, he was the 7th Hokage. Naruto was reluctant to boast, but he had a far superior tactical mind than any other Kage in the elemental countries when it came to allocating teams. She smiled back at him and got back up, only to stumble as she said, "Brilliant deduction. I definitely made the right choice in choosing you." When Naruto noticed this, he stepped in to assist her in moving. He sprinted back to the town after picking her up in bridal style, saying, "Hey now, you're in no shape to be moving yet. I'll carry you back to the town and inform the client of the success." One down, one more to go, he grinned. The lobby of Fairy Tale. After ordering some sake, Naruto sat down and drank it. He confirmed that the devil had been defeated, and he and Lucky returned to the guild. She had a broken bone on her right hand and a sore ankle from a fight before Naruto arrived, so she was taken to the infirmary. Since he saved one of his own guild members, the master insisted that he be paid half, even though he didn't want it. There was absolutely no question about that. He was currently considering how to approach Kana and extend an invitation to join the team. He didn't want to come across as overt, but he also didn't want to come across as subtle. Naruto looked at the clock and noticed that it was almost midnight, and he sighed wearily. He made the decision to look for a hotel to spend the night at since he had nowhere to live. A familiar voice behind him abruptly called his name before he even made it to the building's gates. When the blonde turned around, he saw the very person he had struggled to approach. With a smile adorning her face, Kana said, "Hey Naruto. I heard you saved Lucky the other day." Naruto returned the expression with a nod. In an attempt to find a way to change the topic and twist his words, he responded smoothly, "Yeah, wanted to make a good impression, you know." She laughed, and Naruto grinned, amazed at his good fortune. "Yeah, I know. Hey, wanna go drink together sometimes? Beer tastes better when drinking with a friend rather than alone." Despite her curious look, she nodded and said, "I'd like that. Hey, there's something I want to talk to you about. The other day, the master was talking to me about teams. He gave me a guild registry and the list of magics everyone had. I saw yours and Lucky's and thought it made a good fit with mine." She nodded, knowing where this was heading. Kana would have said yes, but she had other plans. He saw the cunning smile on her face and said, "Sure, but on one condition." He gave a mental shudder. Naruto couldn't decide whether to laugh or roll his eyes at the request. "You have to outdrink me." Unfortunately, because of her drinking, it was predictable. He has always witnessed her holding a mug. Kana grinned at his response, "I'll warn ya, I never get drunk." "Neither do I." He grinned back at her and gladly took up her challenge. "Tomorrow?" she asked, nodding. "Tomorrow." As she left, she failed to notice the ear-splitting smile he had on his face. His declaration that he never got drunk was not a bluff. Because of the stress of rebuilding his home, Naruto drank more than Tsunade and Jiraiya combined. This time, the blonde couldn't help but underestimate someone, even though he knew better. He reasoned that this was also an opportunity to show off his abilities to everyone. The following day, everyone had gathered in the lobby to watch the match between the two challengers. While waiting for the beer barrels to be prepared, they sat at a wooden table that was rectangular in shape and looked down at one another. Everyone was waiting to see if the new guy would have the courage to finally defeat their best and heaviest drinker. A few gamblers were willing to wager on Naruto, despite the fact that everyone was strongly in favor of Kana. A teenager with red hair asked out loud, "What's going on?" Upon her return from her mission, she discovered that everyone in the building was suddenly seated around a table and placing bets. When a voice spoke from beside her, she received an answer. Her competitor, Mirajane. Urza nodded and couldn't resist placing a wager on Kana. Kana and the new guy are having a face-off. If Naruto wins, then Kana has to form a team with him and Lucky. Naturally, she gave in because she didn't want to inspire others to follow suit. Urza heard someone say, "Who do you think's gonna win?" From behind her, she cocked her head to see Myra's sister standing next to another rosy-haired teen. Lasana responded on her behalf, "Kana, of course. Who can outdrink the Queen of Alcohol?" Since it was Kana's unofficial nickname, Urza nodded in agreement. "Well, let's just see." Urza said, looking up to see Mistgun there, which surprised her. She remained silent about his presence because she didn't want to frighten him away by telling anyone else. She also noticed Gildart's drinking and half drunk on the second floor of the room. Luxus was also lying on the second floor, his eyes closed. Urza grinned. For a change, it appeared that everyone at Fairy Tail was having a good day. Urza gave him a fleeting glance on the second floor, but the mystery known as Mistgun ignored it so as not to pique her curiosity anymore. He was interested in the identity of the blonde seated at the table. I have never seen that man before. Here or there. Who is he? He simply chose to watch the match, shaking his head and brushing the matter aside, aiming to unwind today. Kana looked at the blonde and noticed his smug smile, thinking, looks like it's all here. She grinned at him and said, he must be confident, maybe he doesn't know my reputation. Naruto, on the other hand, was thinking differently. Instead, the demon snorted and waved him away, unconcerned. Kyuubi, stay out of this. I'll beat her fair and square. Naruto sighed to himself, don't come crying to me when she just happens to be better than you expected. Even though he might have been correct, he genuinely wanted to be fair. It was unjust to Kana's drinking ability to have the Kyuubi render him impervious to the effects of alcohol, after all. Naruto exclaimed, alright, competitors, are we ready? Was a microphone and a large screen TV really necessary? For this, are they being recorded? He thought, this world sure had a flair for theatrics. Kana roared, hell yeah, and the crowd cheered loudly. Damn right, was Naruto's enthusiastic response. After the applause subsided, Naruto inhaled deeply and prepared himself in his mind. On the opposite side, Kana followed suit. Everyone cheered for him, with the exception of a few who were wagering on Kana, who booed comically. Awesome. Now ladies and gentlemen of Fairy Tail, I present you to the challenger. He hails from the western shores and has traveled all the way here. The newest member of Fairy Tail and the self-proclaimed Dragon of the West, Uzumaki Naruto. The majority of them laughed when Naruto raised his hands in a taunting challenge gesture. The members of the S-class raised their eyebrows at his title, because they don't get the logic. Nani? He doesn't look like a dragon, exclaimed Natsu, his eyes wide with surprise. Happy added naively, I. Mirajane sighed, slapped them both on the head, and told them to stop talking. Everyone cheered when they heard the words, on this side, we have the champion, the mighty queen of alcohol herself. The goddess of wine and mistress of beer. A Fairy Tail veteran. Kana Alberrrrrrrrrrona. Some even bowed down to her in a servant-like gesture. Overall, everyone found it to be a very humorous event. You ready, new guy? She asked as she grasped the barrel. Her audacious decision to target the big gun's head left everyone speechless. They watched Naruto to see if he would respond, and they were thrilled to see that he did. With a cheeky smile, he said, I'll drink y'all under the table. The audience gasped as they saw Kana's angry face, which was wearing a playful frown. Like a race judge, Makarov leapt on the table and raised his hands in the air. Both of them nodded, ready? Go. Declaring the beginning, Naruto and Kana began to jug down their barrels at a terrifying rate. After 3 hours after an hour into the game, Urza asked, are they still at it? She took the time to go shopping for new armor and clothing because neither of the competitors was displaying any signs of stopping at that point. Yup, you'll never guess who's winning though. Urza glanced at the table and was taken aback to see Kana, rather than Naruto, faltering. She noticed that the blonde challenger wasn't much better, with sleepy, half-lidded eyes. Apart from that, he sat up straight and gazed at Kana with a determined expression. She sat at her table, ordered a meal, and nodded in agreement, saying, it's gonna end anytime now. After an hour after his last shot, Naruto was shocked to find he was still alive. 30 minutes ago, they had finished drinking barrels to slow down the game. He noticed Kana, who appeared to be half asleep, in front of him. She burped, ready to give, which caused some anxious gasps from the audience. It was not surprising that most of them placed bets on her. Kana sighed in disappointment, nah, I'm good, besides. It's your turn again. She thought there were 5 of them when she looked at the tequila shot in front of her. This was all that remained after they had long since used up the vodka, rum, and whiskey. Now more than ever she wanted to fall asleep on the table. She never imagined that a man could outdrink her because of her unique condition. Kana's magic made it possible for her to be somewhat impervious to the effects of alcohol. She was permitted to drink as much as she did because of this. She shook her head and attempted to move her hand to pick up the shot, asking, does he have that ability? Because she was experiencing quadriceps, it naturally took a minute. Her drink slipped out of her hands as she raised it. The sight caused everyone to gasp. Kana, however, smiled at them resignedly. "Looks like we're a team," she said as she collapsed and blissfully closed her eyes. Before she hit the floor, the brunette was fast asleep. He was unable to finish the sentence because he collapsed like Kana on his back and passed out like a light. "Ma. I don't know if I won or not. Now to tell luck." Makarov let out a sigh of relief and went to check on them. He was unaware of Naruto's magical condition, but he was aware of Kana's. "Oi, bring in the medics." He sighed and turned to face the audience, asking, "Wait, who won?" Ignoring the AWWS he received from the audience, particularly from those who had wagered on the blonde's win, he dragged them both to the doctor's office to be examined. "Technically, you're supposed to drink one more shot than the other, so it's a draw." He nearly broke down in tears when he realized how much money they had spent on all the drinks for the competition. "You two are very heavy drinkers, I'd say." The following morning, the unpleasant physical symptoms of intoxication, like a headache or stomach issue, are typically experienced hours after stopping alcohol consumption. That is how a hangover is officially defined, and Naruto was experiencing it at the moment. His brain cells felt as though they had recently been burned, repaired, and then burned again. He hadn't consumed so much alcohol at once in a long time. The second time he did this was the day he assumed the duties of Hokage. He had never seen so much paper in his life. Even before he bothered to open his eyes, he could feel the awful headache creep in. With a moan, the blonde attempted to sit up and looked around the room. "Ow." He clutched his head, trying in vain to ease the pain. He simply tried to calm down because the Kyuubi's laughter didn't help either. Beside him, he heard a female voice ask, "You alright?" He noticed Kana sleeping in the bed next to his own when he turned to look to his right. "You too?" she asked, laughing and nodding. She took out her deck of cards and turned on its glow, saying, "Yeah, it was a draw according to the master." It reminded him as before. He nodded and allowed her to use her magic. "This should help, need it?" he asked. He let out a sigh of relief when she was done. The usefulness of her healing magic made him smile. "Thanks, this feels so much nicer." She laughed and informed him of her magical advantage, asking, "Doesn't it? What would his surrogate grandmother do for her?" Naruto shook his head. His expression changed from one of confusion to one of gradual realization when he asked, "So what's the name?" He answered, "I dunno, never was good at naming teams." A voice from the door asked, "How about Team 7? He turned his head slightly and noticed violet hair in the corner of his eyes. "Team 7? Kana asked, not particularly fond of the name's simplicity. Naruto also shook his head. He would not bring that number into this world because, in his opinion, it was cursed for all time. Kana said, something more intimidating. Naruto smiled and snapped his fingers. At that suggestion, Kana nodded her head and asked, "How about Team Otherworld?" Despite being perplexed, I liked the name. She was confused by the name and the meaning, asking, "Why Otherworld? What does it mean?" Naruto grinned. After giving it some thought, she nodded her head angrily, saying, "It means we have otherworldly powers." She was excited by it, and it could definitely scare enemies from a distance. After all, that was the reason for team names. Kana and Naruto exchanged glances and said, "So when's our first mission, Team Otherworld?" Both respond simultaneously. When this hangover's gone, it was their first time laughing together. The lobby of Fairy Tail after a few weeks. Naruto could only characterize this situation as troublesome. How on earth did I get myself into this situation? Our blonde hero screamed to himself in his head. He considered all of the accusations made against him and his group and fought the impulse to send a hail of Rasen shurikens to destroy the Council of Mages. He crossed that idea out because, of course, he lacked the chakra capacity to do that. The beginning of it all began when they went on an A-ranked mission to find an underground mafia core close to a northern town. Naruto had been determined not to make a mistake because it was their first A-ranked quest. Unfortunately, they did. He didn't even want to consider the mission because it was so hazy. Makarov sighed, "Naruto, you do know what this means, right?" Naturally, he had a suspicion that it would occur at least once in his lifetime, but he never imagined it would happen so quickly. They had just spent a few weeks together. Because of their ecstatic behavior during their mission, Team Otherworld was sued by numerous companies. He did what he did to all those charged, holding up the papers. Everyone could hear him read them aloud. Right now, Kana and Lucky thought the floor designs were fascinating. The chuckles he heard from upstairs obviously did not help his situation at all. Keep calm. Keep calm. It'll be over in no time," the man said. He looked up and gritted his teeth when he saw Luxus trying desperately not to laugh. This did not amuse Naruto in the least. Not at all. He decided to put an end to the violet Haired girls suffering first after asking herself, where do I start? After all, out of the three, she had the fewest penalties. Lucky. Her head jerked forward, her eyes full of humorous tears as she gazed at him. Knowing that she had just made a huge fool of herself in front of her new teammates, she cried to herself, you're being accused of destroying the forest path, effectively making the merchants delay their trading indefinitely. The merchant guilds are furious at us for this. Although they were still having some difficulties collaborating, they had made some headway. A little progress, but some. The accusation caused Kana's eyes to light up. Kana, you have been charged of stealing numerous amounts of alcohol from the merchants while they were away and assaulting the client's daughter. Why? She pointed at him and yelled angrily, I was framed I tell you. Besides, she had it coming to her. The woman insulted not just her appearance but also her pride as a mage. Kana recalled hearing the pampered woman say things like, how unwomanly, and, she'll never find a husband, when they first met. In other words, when she crossed the line regarding her unwoman. Like drinking habits, Kana beat the living daylights out of her. The master shook his head. The list took up almost the whole page, and Naruto. I guess I'll start with the good parts. You did accomplish the mission, of course. The underground world of criminals, UWC, have begun to fear your name. The Dragon of the West's legend is starting to spread nicely. Naruto was so proud of himself. But, the blonde thought sorrowfully to himself, here it comes. The battle nearly destroyed the entire town scare. The merchants were furious when you shredded their land to pieces. Look at their houses. It looks more like a wooden igloo-ish triangle, much less a real building. How in the world did you do this kind of damage? He yelled with a rage, and Naruto to blush. With a sigh, Makarov narrowed his eyes and studied the damage image. Halfway through the lecture, everyone in the building gasped at their master's radical change of direction. It's so artistic. Look at this new house. It looks like how the old civilizations used to make them. Amazing. This one looks like a panda. Hey Guildarts, take a look at this thing. Team Otherworld appeared shocked as a whole, with one moment displaying rage and the next displaying admiration. At last Luxus broke and began to roll on the ground, with the rest of the guild following suit. Naruto's expression instantly became angry. They all turned to face him and yelled, what the hell is so funny? Natsu, the loudest of the group, yelled, you're taking this too seriously. The boy had a history of running afoul of the council. Gray continued to chuckle at Naruto's gravity. Their response perplexed the blonde. He and his group were anticipating a full-time punishment for their behavior. Wasn't half the town destroyed? Had they not attacked the client's daughter? Had they not disrupted commerce along those same regions? The team looked at Guildarts' laughing face and was perplexed by the casual response they received. He laughed at the thought of himself destroying every building he saw and said, Ma, come on Naruto. Everyone makes mistakes on their first A-ranked mission. Even me. I did everything you three did but in less time. In any case, he was too lazy to drive. The group let out a sigh of relief. They were terrified of punishment because it had been their first time causing such damage on a mission. The master remarked, don't worry too much, I'll speak to the council tomorrow. Makarov waved it off, saying it was no big deal, and said, thank you, master. As long as you know you did the right thing, there will be no punishment. That's Fairy Tail's true motto. Ain't that right? Everyone yelled with agreement. Naruto nodded and grinned, pleased that his guild was as incredibly relaxed as they are. He turned around and began to move away, searching for a seat. Well, that was a pleasant surprise. They all sighed with relief, with the exception of Kana. She grinned and said, nah, I already half suspected it. Naruto simply grinned and shook his head. This guild is something else all right. He thought to himself as he searched for a seat, happy to spend the remainder of the day unwinding. Back there Guildarts had invited Makarov to the back to talk about something, so he asked, so what did you want to talk to me about? He assumed it was about work or something because his expression had been so serious, which was a little unexpected for someone as laid back as him. The request made him pale. Master, I want to apply for the 100-year mission. He said. The last thing he suspected of the man beside him was that. Looking back, though, he shouldn't have been shocked because he had already noticed the man's subtle hinting for some time. Well, perhaps not so subtle, considering that he had cleaned out almost 3/4 of the S-class missions on the building's upper level. He sighed, turned to face his best friend and longtime friend, and debated in his head until he found a workable solution. I don't know. It's tough, and you know what happened to the last group who went on the 100-year quest. Guildarts said with a sorrowful nod, having never witnessed such a disintegration of an elite squadron of mages. The ultimate goal had been to vanquish and demolish Deliora, the devil's misfortune and catastrophe. To exterminate the formidable demon, the guild known as Lamia Scale dispatched an entire battalion of mages 8 years ago. 3 S-class mages and 5 regulars, each with great individual power, had made up the group. They were torn apart, bitterly, as soon as the battle started. Lamia Scale has yet to bounce back from the setbacks. And every day, I thank for defeating him. Makarov nodded in agreement, following suit. The ice alchemist vanquished Deliora and imprisoned her in ice for all time. Even before she fought the demon, the elderly man had admired the woman, but after her terrible sacrifice, he insisted that she be named one of the 10 wizard saints for all eternity. It had been made that way because, of course, no one objected. They bowed their heads in her remembrance of. Gray had a great master. What are they able to say? People could aspire to be like her. The world had not seen a better ice alchemist mage in a century than her. Gildarts nodded his head and sighed, but I still can't believe that you want to take up this one. I want to do this no matter what you say, master. Makarov shivered as he studied the mission poster. It was a complex mission that was extremely challenging to complete. Gildarts' eyebrows were raised, eager to hear the master's thoughts. Fine, but on one condition, he said. The taller man had consistently refused invitations to participate in the games, claiming he was too lazy. You have to participate in this year's mage tournament. The condition caught him off guard because the master was never one to flaunt his power when he felt like it. Why? He grinned and said, just for the sake of competing. Everyone has wanted you to join in the contest for a while now. The winners are usually Luxus or Urza and sometimes Mira or Fried depending on who participates. But if you join, then everyone will. Not to mention that it'll be a fun. He had another reason for wanting this, but he was leaving it up to the taller man to figure that out. He sighed resignedly, not really understanding why he wanted to do it. I see. Alright, I'll do it. He grinned and said, good, then I'll sign y'all up. Come on, don't give me that face, it'll be fun. It wasn't a problem to have fun, Gildarts said, shaking his head. He liked the idea, in fact. The issue was how he would soundly destroy everyone without offending anyone. It caused problems. Magnolia's streets, one could hear heavy, quick footsteps if they were close to the Magnolia apartment complex, which was a sign of one Uzumaki Naruto's annoyance. He had been having problems finding an apartment, so after leaving the guild for the day, he set out to find one that would work for him temporarily. After looking at every available spot, the blonde discovered that they had all been taken the morning before he arrived. He felt that he was a victim of housing discrimination because they rejected him, which greatly infuriated him. In actuality, the first 3 locations he visited were entirely honest about their conditions, and he had arrived too late. However, he was unaware of this, and by the time he left the 3rd position, a strong sense of murderous intent started to emanate from him, frightening everyone who came into contact with him. Fear, that's why no one else had offered him a spot. It was the humorous yet ironic reality. Damn it. It's no good, he exclaimed, sobbing with anime as he sat on a bench in the thankfully deserted park. He gave it a mental slap because he could hear the 9-tailed fox laughing cruelly inside of him, but it didn't really do anything because the fox was still upset about the gesture. He was playing with his tenant and totally forgot to pay attention to his surroundings. The blonde quickly released his muse and looked up to see a short, middle-aged man staring at him with interest. Oi, you alright? He asked. The other man gave a sympathetic nod. Yeah, just having a hard time finding a house. For a young person like him, finding a home would be challenging because Magnolia has always been a crowded place. Though he was unaware of it, the blonde was lucky today. The man glanced at his clothes and blinked briefly before saying, I understand how you feel. Then he grinned. The blonde nodded and let out a melancholy sigh. Those clothes. Are you a mage? The shorter man gave a cunning smile. The blonde's head snapped up so quickly that he could have slashed it off the next second. You know, there's this rumor of a haunted apartment room 2 blocks from here. In fact, I own the building. My business has been going haywire and I need help. If you can solve this problem, I'll give you the room. Heck, I'll even give you the first 6 months free. Naruto gave the shorter man a grateful smile as he gazed at him with wide eyes. Really? He asked, smiling and nodding. Naruto leapt to his feet and clenched his fist. He looked down at the man and said, Yosh, so what do I have to do? Naruto nodded, assuming it was something like genjutsu or illusionary techniques back home. Great, the name's Yo-Kid. All I want you to do is check out the room and see if it's really haunted. No one has been able to figure out why, but once someone goes in they immediately appear outside the building walls. Fortunately for him, such a thing had no effect on him since he had learned the sage arts. The man asked Naruto to follow him to the apartment room, saying, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." His mouth fell open upon seeing the location. The building's architecture was designed to last, and the lawn was exquisitely mowed. He pondered how in the world the cherry blossom tree had gotten to be on the building's roof. Fubari Onsen was the hotel's name. Naruto smiled. "Asana? Niece?" The man grinned and asked, "How do you get the tree up there?" Naruto grinned and said, "You don't know? You must be new around here then. We're famous for our sakura trees." It was undoubtedly his kind of pad, and the scene was one of amazing tranquility. He began to ascend the stairs, saying, "Okay, follow me." At the top floor, he paused and gazed at the only room nearby. The door, which was roughly the height of his former master Jiraiya, was very large and beautifully carved with a floral design. It was easy to grip because the doorknob was round and completely white. The shorter man nodded and said, "Nice place, this it?" Naruto nodded, comprehending his predicament. "It's my best room. The incident started a while ago. I've been trying to get mages to help, but they've been really busy lately. Guilds accept a lot of jobs, but there was little chance of getting this particular position." Naruto hesitated before approaching the door, but he halted when he sensed the strong aura emanating from the knob. It was a deft move, and his eyes widened slightly. He grasped the handle and verified that it was true. The trigger for the illusion is the door handle. No civilian or average mage should be able to sense this easily. As soon as someone touches the knob, a powerful illusion is cast in a large margin, confusing everyone. He became aware of the illusion when he felt the natural energy flare. With his eyes closed, Naruto collected enough natural chakra to extinguish the illusion. The shorter man became confused as the surrounding air crumbled into pieces. He inquired, "What happened?" After explaining the workings of illusions to him, Naruto only made his confusion worse. He gave in and nodded, allowing the teenager to carry on with his work. He was amazed by the room when he opened the door and said, "Okay, I'm going in." It was spacious, spotless, and offered a view of the whole town. Naruto grinned because he had won the lotto today. He was too preoccupied staring out into the city to notice the sudden blow to his head. Holding his head in agony, he leapt to the opposite side of the room and searched for the criminal to beat him up. Only to discover nobody is there. "The hell?" he asked, perplexed, and he looked around once more. The sensation of being struck over the head returned. He rubbed his head in excruciating pain and jumped once more. With a painful groan, he said, "OWWW." He heard someone ask, "What are you doing in my pad?" It was aggressive but surprisingly gentle and feminine. His confusion increased as he looked around the room and saw no one nearby. He didn't initially believe that there was a real ghost in this room, but his eyes widened hysterically. The thought of facing a ghost frightened the blonde to no end. Sakura told him numerous tales about how powerful ghosts were in comparison to people. He had no idea that she was merely attempting to frighten him. Naruto was unaware that Ino had dared her to do so. He glanced around once more and heard the invisible culprit let out a distressed sigh. Naruto looked down and instantly forgot his ghost theory when he noticed something unexpected. "Oi, down here." A feline. A talking, blue cat. The cat shook her head, asking, "Happy?" He thought it was a she because of the feminine tone of the voice. "What the hell are you talking about?" The cat was dressed in what appeared to be jeans underneath a green blouse. Light dress and a green Gatsby hat. He assumed that the tiny cowboy boots she was wearing were from a dress. Up toy intended for 5-year-olds. Her right ear had what appeared to be a sword-shaped earring, and her eyes were surrounded by a pinkish, purple shadow. She gave him another look and said, Sorry, I didn't know Happy had any relatives." "And why the hell are you in my pad, human?" she asked, getting up to slap him across the face with what appeared to be a guitar. He gave a painful yelp and took another step back. She threatened, "Now answer my question or face my wrath, you pest." At last, Naruto recovered from his shock and regained his composure. "I'm sorry, but there has been rumors of this room being haunted. I was offered this room to complete this job. Never did I imagine another cat to be here." The exceeding raised her eyebrows. Naruto nodded and asked, "You've seen another of my kind?" Natsu's partner, Happy, is actually Natsu and Lisana's son. Years before Naruto arrived at Fairy Tail, they had hatched him. "But I will not be giving up my only home," the blonde said, looking at her bewildered. She shook her head, asking, "You don't have another home?" "No. Now get out, you pesky human monkey." Her harshness did not surprise Naruto. After all, he had gone inside her house. The issue was that another mage would kidnap her and take her in if he didn't act now. He didn't want to deprive someone of their home, and he didn't think this would ever happen. She gave him a crazy look and said, "I see. I guess I could relate. I also have no other home and I don't have one now. Why don't we share this place? If her frown was any indication, she was getting increasingly irritated as she screamed, "Why in the hell would I let you do that?" She gave him a frustrated look and said, "Because if I left, then another mage will come down here and surely kick you out. Now, I don't want that to happen, so how about we share?" He was correct, even though she didn't want to acknowledge it. Even though her illusions were clever and powerful, they were obviously insufficient if someone broke in so easily. Naruto grinned at her and said, Damn you human, how did you even get in here? My magic is no joke." She took another look at him in an attempt to determine his level of magic. Yes, it was a strong illusion. Any mage below B-class level would have undoubtedly been duped. I, on the other hand, am far ahead of that level, being a sage. The Exceed was taken aback by the strength of his power and the sheer magnitude of it. "Sage?" she inquired, unsure of the word. The blonde tried to act calm as her eyes widened at the mistake. With a nod of comprehension, she went to the couch and took a seat. "It's a term from my village for those who've attained a certain level of mastery of their magic." Naruto smiled while raising his hands in a defensive position. "Whatever. Now, I guess I have no choice, huh? Fine, we'll share, but you had better not rat me out," he said. She squinted in shock, saying, "Ma, I'm not like that. Besides, I can cook." "I don't believe you." Naruto smiled about it. "I can make something if you'd like." The abrupt request startled Naruto. "Fried shrimp, cooked fish, and white rice will do. And don't forget to warm up the sake, human." When he heard her stomach growl loudly, it was less shocking. Her face flushed and she turned away from him, which he thought was pretty cute. She shook her head and said, "Naruto." With a sudden outburst of murderous intent, Naruto declared, "I don't have any fish paste." His eyes briefly turned red before returning to their original blue color. He burst into anime tears and muttered, "It means maelstrom, damn it. Why does everyone keep saying, never mind, about how unfair the world was to him?" Startled by the outburst, she waited for him to finish complaining before responding. The Exceed blinked and said, "Naruto is my name," laughed hard, once, twice, then fell to the ground. Her loud laughter only heightened his annoyance. Having a name with two meanings was so embarrassing and annoying. She stopped laughing after a few minutes, but the laughter persisted. He shook his head, saying, "Humans name their children so stupidly. He would do anything to learn his parents' names." However, he suspected that Jiraiya's first book, The Legend of the Gutsy Ninja, had something to do with it. She at least had the grace to blush at her rudeness. "What's your name? We will be sharing this place after all," she said. Naruto sighed and smiled, saying, "Name's Tayuya. Now make me that food." He created 3 clones. 2 to prepare the food and 1 to notify Yo, the landlord, that the mission was complete. They sat down to eat at the dinner table 30 minutes later. Although Naruto was unsure of the reason behind her strong affinity for fish, he surmised that it had something to do with their kind. Happy was frequently spotted holding a fish. She went on, "This isn't bad. For a human." Naruto gave a headshake. "Naruto." "Whatever," he sighed. He didn't want to pry, but right now, it was an inevitable issue. "Have something against humans?" she asked, abruptly stopping her meal to gaze at him with spectral eyes. He shook his head, saying, "You wouldn't understand." With a sigh, she set down the shrimp she intended to eat and said, "Try me. I just hate humans because they tend to be foolish. Once they attain power, they misuse them. They look down on others and cast them aside like trash." Naruto nodded in agreement. After all, he grew up like a Jinchuriki. He would never say that to her. "She's right, brat. Your kind tends to do such foolishness often. This feline is also hiding something from us." Naruto gave a mental nod. The fox snorted and returned to his cage to sleep. "I won't pry. Everyone deserves their privacy. And what do you mean by this? You haven't helped me at all since I got here." The blonde let out a mental sigh and made an unsuccessful attempt to be kind to the fox. His loss to him all those years ago still made the Biju very angry. She looked into his eyes and saw the hollow expression she had on the day she left, and she said, "I understand. I am no fool to the dark side of human nature." The day she severed her connection to her stupid home. Tayuya acknowledged his words with a nod. She was completely uninterested in what he meant, so she didn't even bother to ask. Anything he said would only make her resentful because people could commit many sins. Naruto chose to change the topic after noticing that the atmosphere had darkened. She glanced at the guitar and gave it a quiet smile, asking, "So what's with the guitar?" As her tone changed, Naruto grinned and said, "It's my passion." It had no after effect of cold and was softer. "Can you play a song?" she asked, giving him another dumb look. Of course I can. Why else would I keep a guitar? Her eyes softened, and she forgot the previous conversation. That's not what I meant. I was asking if you could play one right now. No, he raised his eyebrows. Why not? 'Cause I don't want to. Her face flushed with rage at his taunt. Ah, please, are you shy? I can understand if you're bad and hesitant to show me your terrible skills. She proceeded to raise her instrument and slam it for the third time against his head. She tuned her guitar and began to play a gentle tune, saying, "Fine." Her voice sounded very different from her normal tone, even though she was singing beautifully. Naruto sensed his memories slipping into his head from his necklace. Shikamaru is one of his 8 co-workers' best friends. The indolent man had accompanied the blonde on a number of missions and helped him when he needed it. He observed Sakura as well as their interactions. They laughed a lot and had a lot of fun together, even though she frequently punched him. After he became the Hokage, those were the good times. The gentle tune abruptly changed to one of intense sadness. He witnessed Sasuke battling him fiercely. Rasen Shuriken clashed into his Susanoo, Chidori clashed into his Rasengan, and finally his hands pierced his stomach. The memory of them both lying exhausted and covered in blood on the ground following their altercation. The song had a melancholy tune at the end. Naruto sighed as he felt his memories fading back into Tsunade's necklace. It really was his biggest flaw. That is, the memories concealed within his necklace. He would be held accountable if he failed to ensure that the information never ended up in the wrong hands. Naruto gave her a nod and asked, "How's that?" Her fingers, or paws, moved over the frets as though they were natural to her, demonstrating her obvious skill with the instrument. She assumed a contemplative stance and asked, "What's the name?" "One, Past Story." The irony caused Naruto to laugh. She nodded, reacting the same way he did when she first heard the song. Indeed. It was, in fact, very emotional and sad. Knowing what she was talking about, Naruto nodded. "I first heard it from a stellar spirit, then I learned it the day after. Only those with keys were able to call forth celestial spirits, which were like summons that existed in a different dimension. They required a contract, but it was still very helpful." "Hey," she asked him, "what?" Her eyes grew wide as she said, "Join my guild." "Why?" After spending the first 3 weeks here and subsisting solely on the food in the refrigerator, she nodded her head and said, "You are very skilled, Tayuya. Besides, you don't want to be stuck here all day, do you?" "I guess," laughed Naruto. She shook her head and said, "Great, you can be on my team. Who knows, you might even make friends." He sighed at her reluctance to open up, saying, "I have no interest in that. But it's better than being here all day, like you said." "Well, he's had much worse experiences." She gave an indifferent nod. "All right. So that's a yes?" she asked. Abruptly, he rushed toward her and gave her a bone-crushing embrace. "Yeah." She lifted her guitar by herself and slammed it against his skull once more, annoyed by his sudden outburst. "OWWW. No hugging," he sulked. He attempted to give her another hug but ended up hitting her in the head with a guitar. "Ah, but you're SOOCUTEE." It didn't deter him, though, as he quickly drew closer and gave her a hug, making sure the guitar was far away this time. "Stupid humans," she told herself in her head, unable to move her arms either way. The guitar was out of her grasp, so Tayuya swore in her head. Thus, Uzumaki Naruto, the Dragon Slayer of the night, met Tayuya, his superior partner. Talk about getting 2 things done at once. Business District, Magnolia. The next day Naruto's voice was harsh and unwearable as he said, no, however, it was in vain because his Exceed partner gave him a glare that almost made him shudder. Her calculating pink eyes filled him with utter rage at his response. Her voice was filled with anger as she asked, "And why the hell not?" Naruto made every effort to avoid recoiling at her stare. To be honest, he was afraid of her eyes. It made him think of Hinata when her sister Hanabi was insulted by a fool. He never in his life imagined that the shy, adorable Hinata could completely ruin someone else. Literally. He put the past out of his mind, focused on the cat in front of him, and made the strongest argument he could. He yelled, "It's too expensive." She had been pressuring him to purchase this old record from the store for the last hour and a half. To the best of her knowledge, it was apparently impossible to locate. Even for someone with his salary, Naruto conceded that the price was excessive. He would never purchase something worth 2 average A-ranked quests, and the record was 500,000 jewels. He thought it was absolutely absurd, really. She gave him a face slap, causing the blonde to gasp in pain. "This is as cheap as it could get, you fool," she said. Her attitude completely changed as she gazed at the record with admiration. "Oi, that hurts, ya damn cat." "What's so special about this thing anyways?" she said. She spoke passionately, saying, "This record is absolutely legendary and I will never let it fall into another's hand. I must have it." It was clear from the blonde's brief acquaintance that music was her greatest passion. Hell, the blonde was certain she would wed him if music were a person. The fox inside him said, "That was a terrible joke," though it didn't accomplish anything. Naruto slapped the fox after getting a mental tick. Frustrated by this circumstance, he mentally retorted, "Shut up, I'm a prankster, not a stand-up comedian." "What's in this anyways?" he asked, holding up the record inquisitively, only to have it quickly taken from Tayuya. Naruto became increasingly irritated at her remark. "Don't touch it, you'll destroy its value with your disgusting human hands." Fortunately for him, those around him were observing them with mild amusement and interest. "You see, Naruto, once upon a time in this very land called Fury, there was a stellar spirit that was rumored to be the most beautiful and the most talented singer in the lands. Her beauty and talent was so great that many rich, disgusting humans tried to buy her key and have her all to themselves. One of those humans succeeded and made her fulfill all their selfish and perverse fantasies. As the days passed, her sadness grew and grew exponentially, as so did her abuse. Every time she cried, she wrote and recorded a song that contained every single last bit of her emotion, such as anger, bitterness, sorrow, hopelessness, and so on. As the times passed, the greedy human died and she was set free. Free of the terror that is the darkness of humanity. The stellar spirit left her record in this land, hoping that it would change the ways of humanity and their pitiful greed with its beautiful melody. The great stellar spirit was never to be seen again. Halfway through the story, she had already drawn quite a big crowd. When they heard about the tragedy, some of them couldn't help but cry as they listened to the sheer passion in her voice. Even Naruto was astonished by her storytelling skills. He could even sense the Kyuubi's undivided focus on her, as though he wanted her to keep beating up people in general. Like everyone else, he found the story to be very captivating. He saw her look at the record with sorrow in her eyes as she delicately raised it with her paws. This record contains some of the most beautiful songs in the world. That is why I will, at any cost, keep this out of the wrong hands. I will not let her abuse go to waste. I will not let her talents go to waste. I will not let this record be destroyed carelessly. I will learn from her pain and distribute it to the world myself. And with that, she completely persuaded Naruto to continue purchasing it. Tayuya grinned to herself. The story was real, but she used her innate talent for wordplay to make it seem like the most terrible thing ever. With a sigh, Naruto gave up his dispute and made the decision to purchase the item. He was hoping to persuade the master to give him an S-class mission. "Alright," she said with a triumphant smile and a thank you lick of her cheeks, as cats frequently do. It's strange that the audience didn't even consider her being a talking cat after all this time. They finally made the decision to go to the guild and introduce Tayuya to everyone after the crowd dispersed, much to the confusion of the blonde, who didn't even notice them there. He said softly, "You're really good at telling stories, Tayuya." The blonde sighed. It was a valid reason to hate his kind. It was a true story, Naruto. One of the many reasons why I detest humans so much. While this world is full of selfish idiots, there are also those who are still selfless and chivalrous. The Exceed nodded and leapt from the ground to the top of his head with ease. Not all humans are like that, Tayuya. Some are even so kind that they would willingly give their very lives to save people they don't even know. In order to make herself more comfortable, Naruto removed his bandana. She was happy with her new bed and purred with pleasure. She had already become attached to the blonde in just one day, whether she realized it or not. Making friends was, after all, his greatest talent. The blonde nodded, having seen firsthand the darker side of humanity. "I know, but that doesn't change the despicable nature that all humans have in them. Good or bad, darkness lays within them. You understand this, I believe?" He stopped talking about it, sensing that she was done talking about it. Naruto was aware that it would be difficult to alter her perception of people, and at times he thought it was an impossible task. But until she at least warmed up a little, he wasn't going to give up. If you don't insult her passion, she was actually very pleasant to be around. He nodded and let her sleep comfortably on his hair, hoping she wouldn't ruin it too much. "Wake me up when we get there." In any case, he didn't mind. The fairy tale. "Oi, Natsu, the rosy-headed mage said, turning to face whoever gave him a call. At random, he ran into Gray, his rival, a black-haired teenager with a bad habit of taking off his clothes in public. "What?" He frowned. Ever since they first met, the two had gotten into arguments. Gray narrowed his eyes at him and returned the scowl with full force. Everyone in the area let out a sigh. Regrettably, this happened frequently. His tone was crude, as if he wanted to start a fight, and he asked, You signing up for the tournament? He bragged to the guild. Hell yeah, and I'm gonna win this time. Everyone moaned when they heard that he had never won since entering. The S-class mages Luxus, Urza, Mirajane, or Fried were typically the winners. Many believed that Mistgun simply didn't want to be seen, but he never took part. They were also aware that Gildart's Crive, their ace, never took part. The Dragon Slayer's pride was crushed at the remark, "That's what you say every year, idiot. Luxus usually crushes you before you get to the semi-finals." It was true that every time they fought, the older blonde had easily crushed him to pieces. He gave his opponent a scowl. The boy with the raven hair suddenly flushed with rage. "What about you, huh? Didn't you lose to him in the first round last year? How long did you last?" "I think it was for about 6 seconds. Before he could use his alchemy magic, he was already defeated. The most humiliating day of his life." The two glared at one another and carried on with their daily insult contest. "Well, at least I ain't a punk like you who rushes face first into the opponent. Luxus beat you without lifting a finger," they said. They heard a voice ask, "Oh Urza Chan, how's your day been?" from somewhere. The urge to fight was immediately crushed by Gray and Natsu, who hung their arms around each other's necks as though to declare their friendship. Natsu looked around for the red-headed maiden who frequently beat the living daylights out of them when they fought, and he said nervously, we're best friends." "Why be best friends?" Gray went on, disregarding the background laughter. Urza's punching power was greater than that of most men in the guild, including Elfman, the resident who constantly boasted about being a true man. Pride be damned. The woman was nowhere to be seen when the two turned to look around. Everyone looked up when they heard Gildarts laughing at their antics from the top floor. His eyes were wide with shock, bewilderment, and betrayal. "Ma, I knew that would be funny. But I didn't expect it to be this funny." "You tricked us," shouted Natsu. With a naive expression, Happy flew up to his head and pointed at the man. What the hell, man? Don't scare us like that," Gray cried in a frantic, exaggerated voice, breathing heavily. Everyone made fun of them. It was well known that if Urza ever caught the two rivals fighting, she would beat them up. "Anyways, so I hear you two are in the mage mash again, huh?" they asked, nodding resolutely. Gildarts smiled at his resolve, saying, "Yeah, everyone better watch out." The boy had amazing potential, and this was a way for him to gain more experience. In any case, that was all he needed. When he said, "That's good, I'll be going in as well," everyone gasped. Luxus's eyes widened, and the idea of facing the guild's strongest mage made his blood boil. Like Luxus, Mirajane was thrilled about the chance to battle Gildarts, and she was grinning bloodthirstily. Her dark laugh caused her siblings, Lasana and Elfman, to recoil in comic fear. She muttered, "Sister is being scary again." Elfman gave Mira a nod and a sigh. In contrast to these two, who were fairly normal, well, Lasana was fairly normal. Her takeover magic had a significant impact on her. Mira muttered to herself, "This is going to be enjoyable." As everyone turned to face the entrance, they saw Urza standing there with what appeared to be a year's worth of luggage behind her. Count me in as well. Because they were already accustomed to the madness known as fairy tale, no one even bothered to question her quirk. Hell, only Levi and Lasana were even remotely normal. Gildarts remarked, "Urza Chan, back from your mission already, I see?" With no pause, she said, "Hi, it was only a simple extermination." Everyone felt sorry for her victims because of her lingering remarks. After all, her magic was lovely, bloody lovely, if you will. The older man sighed and asked, "So what's this I hear about you joining the Mage Mash?" Her eyebrows raised in interest as she said, "I asked the master for a favor. He said yes, but with the condition of joining." "A favor?" Urza shook her head in agreement with Luxus, Natsu, and Gray, but Urza disagreed, saying, "Ma, you'll know after the tournament's done. You guys should train, it's in a week and I'm sure you all want to have the title of strongest, nay? No one has watched Gildarts fight in years, so why is he suddenly entering a tournament? No, I just want to see you fight firsthand. It should be interesting after all." Of course, she had to see this. What rational person was unaware of Gildarts' talent? The fact that the man turned down a position as one of the 10 saints is undoubtedly evidence of his magic. "Ma, I'm nothing special," he said with a sheepish smile, ignoring everyone's frustrated expressions. They began talking more about the competition, with each person offering their opinion on the winner. Gildarts was the obvious choice, of course, but some people were more upbeat than others. Take Natsu, for instance. Naruto entered the building at that point. Natsu yelled, Hey Luxus, are the Ragenshu entering? The older teenager gave a head nod. Luxus reasoned that since Fried, Evergreen, and Bixlow were due in tomorrow, they would most likely come in. Sweet. Naruto exclaimed, raising his eyebrows in delight. He made the decision to engage the other elites in conversation. He asked aloud, "What's this about?" And Natsu looked over to see Naruto. He chose to explain, putting the cat on his head aside for a moment. "We're having the annual guild Mage Mash. Mage Mash?" he asked, perplexed, having no idea what they were discussing. Gray responded on his behalf, saying, "It's a tournament. There's no prize or anything, you get bragging rights though." Naruto grinned. They pointed to the clipboard next to the master, who was sitting up sleeping, and said, "Cool, where do I sign up?" When Naruto saw that his master was so much more relaxed than his previous bosses, he suppressed a laugh. He quickly signed his name on the paper as he approached him. Makarov awoke at that moment and looked closely at the top of his head. His eyes widened after he blinked twice. The blonde glanced up at the older man and grinned, Naruto. He turned to face everyone, grinning even more, and asked, "What's that on your head?" This caused his new friend to wake up. They heard a moan from the top of his head and gasped when they saw another happy. "Oi, Tayuya, wake up, ya cutie." When he first saw her, the cat's eyes were filled with love. On the floor, everyone's mouths fell open. "We're here already? I wanted more sleep." When she noticed that everyone was looking at her in wonder, she asked, "What?" Tayuya gave a headshake. Humans are weird. Applied particularly to the group surrounding her. They haven't said anything for almost a full minute. The first to speak was the master. Naruto laughed and asked, "Where did you find her?" The master grinned curiously as he said, "Funny story actually. Hey, do you mind if she joins the guild? She has very strong magic." "Are you attempting to shift the topic?" As he eyed the Exceed, he thought, "I'll let it go for now, but I want to hear the story later." Unlike Natsu's partner Happy, he felt a great deal of magic in her. He laughed and said, "That means she was older and had experience using magic." The boy had found a wonderful partner. He said to the guild, "Sure, I don't see why not. She's more than welcome, ain't that right?" They all yelled in agreement as they abruptly awoke from their daze. Natsu said, "Oi, where did you find her? What's her name? Where did she come from? Do you want some fish?" All of the questions made Naruto perspire, but the final one, which came from the other resident cat, was particularly intense. He grinned at the possibility that love at first sight was real. It's unfortunate that the ideal was dashed the moment he witnessed Tayuya rejecting him. However, she was tactful and appeared to disappoint him only slightly. Naruto grinned. She had apparently rejected other men before. For future taunts against his new friend, he filed the idea away in his mind. He was aware that although she would eventually beat him, their friendship would grow stronger. It's true that Naruto occasionally exhibited masochism. He saw that his team was temporarily absent and asked, "Hey, has anyone seen my team?" They had just returned from an extensive A-ranked mission, so it wasn't surprising. Since it was apparently the first time for Kana and Lucky, he assumed that they would be sleeping at home in order to restore their physical and magical vitality. Naruto nodded, mentally adding, "Visit Kana and Lucky," to his list of daily tasks. Kana called in sick, and Lucky is at home resting. Despite his brief time with them, he developed a strong bond with his teammates. When they hung out, Lucky was always kind and pleasant to him, and Kana was intelligent and entertaining to talk to. His guild and team were like family to him. Makarov nodded and smiled, saying, "I'll be sure to check up on them later." "You do that. I see that you have signed up for the tournament, Naruto. Piece of advice, you should train physically. While our friends here are mages, they are also very strong physically." Naruto laughed and confused the elderly gentleman. "Don't worry about me, boss. If it's a contest of physical endurance, then there is nothing on this earth that could outlast me." Naruto then lowered his voice so that only the elder could hear him, saying, "I see. That is very good to hear. Well, good luck. It starts in a week." He was about to have a brief conversation and didn't want anyone to overhear it. "Master." The older man's eyebrows shot up at the serious tone of his voice. "If it's possible, I would like to speak with you about something. I will wait for the end of the tournaments to talk to you about it though." That intrigued him. Since joining a month ago, the boy had remained a mystery to him. His frequent loudness and shinobi-like subtlety made it nearly impossible to read him. The man was unaware of the accuracy of his guess. "Very well." His voice returned to normal, and he resumed the previous conversation. "Cool. So who's participating in the tournament?" he asked. He nodded and departed after expressing gratitude, saying, The final list will be made tomorrow." Naruto walked over to a nearby table to speak briefly with his new acquaintance. Naruto, who has always enjoyed music, nodded and grinned, saying, "Well, this place is really lively. A little music could do this place good." Tayuya disregarded the last sentence, which read, "The guild likes to do a lot of conventional activities. You should participate, it could help you make friends." "Excellent. I will prepare a guitar arrangement for that then." He handed her the menu to peruse and said, "Cool, so what do you want to order?" There was never a need for it because the blonde already knew what he would choose. Calling the waitress over, Naruto gave her his order. She looked at the cat that was staring at her expectantly and nodded, saying, "Please, beef ramen and a glass of water." After writing down the order, the waitress nodded and departed right away to enter the request. A dish of grilled anago. 1. Another of sashimi and white rice. For beverages, I would like warm sake. The two listened to the rambling of the other members around them while they sat in pleasant silence. Tayuya observed the guild members in silence. She thought they were noisy, bothersome, and ultimately human. All people were the same to her. Regardless of their personality, race, or height. She knew that they could become ugly monsters if the right strings were pulled, so she didn't care about trivial things like that. When one of their comrades' voices addressed them, she was roused from her muse. The blonde looked up to see Urza beside him and said, "Naruto-san." With a smile, Naruto motioned for her to take a seat. She nodded at him, saying, "Just Naruto is fine. We're all friends here." The red-headed girl was always on missions, so they never had time to chat. "Thanks for that. I, myself, don't usually allow my comrades to call me with formalities." Urza only took a moment to collect her thoughts before asking, "So, how can I help you?" The blonde nodded in agreement. "I heard that you formed a team with Lucky and Kana. So how have you guys been holding up so far? Though I take S-class missions, I find the A-class sections a bit tiring as well." "Well, Kana's been doing great. She's a great fighter and those cards have been quite useful in many situations. Lucky is the same. While not a great fighter, she makes it up with her intellect. That was his team's overall goal. Balance, strength, and intelligence. Together, they possessed a wide range of abilities and specialties that would eventually provide them with numerous career options." With a sigh of relief, Urza said, "That's great." She had been somewhat concerned about Kana and Lucky, two of her friends. She was acquainted with them and regarded them as guild sisters. Whether they were friends or comrades in arms, Urza was close to everyone in Fairy Tail. Kana was close to the armored woman because of their friendship and guild status, as both of them were seasoned guild members like Urza. Lucky was enjoyable to play with and chat with, much like her younger sister. As Naruto saw the girl's relief, he added, "Ma, don't worry, as long as I'm there, they won't be hurt. I promise." Urza's eyes widened slightly at his ability to read her, but she still grinned. The blonde grinned and gave her the thumbs up, saying, "Thank you. Even though they can take care of themselves, I will trust you with their well-being, Naruto." Urza nodded, unaware that he was telling the truth. "Don't worry, I am quite strong myself. Nothing short of an army of immortal freaks can stop me." The waitress arrived with their orders just as she opened her mouth to speak. Together, Naruto and Tayuya uttered the words, "Itadakimasu." Urza was attempting to strike up another conversation when Naruto and his cat began to eat. The blonde smiled and nodded, saying, "So, I understand that you'll be in the tournament." Urza shook her head, saying, "Well, it sounds like fun. I wonder who's participating though." "The usual 10 plus you since Guildarts whom usually doesn't competes. Kana's 6, I doubt that she'll be in this time, which means you're the 10th. Urza said before going on. Naruto whistled gratefully at the list, saying, "It appears that you and I will be in this time, along with Gray, Natsu, Luxus, Fried, Bixlow, Mira, Evergreen, and Guildarts." It was a competition between the best of Fairy Tail. The Raijenshu were present, along with Guildarts, the guild's strongest member, Luxus, an S-class magician, Gray, an ice alchemist, Salamander Natsu, Mira, the leader of the Takeover team, and, last but not least, the Titania, Urza herself. Furthermore, the Dragon of the West himself cannot be overlooked. Quite the list. I've heard of the Raijenshu's reputation from the south and I must say that they sound pretty impressive. Urza gave a nod of approval. They're a great team with a great leader. Fried, whom is an S-class magician like myself, has made quite a strong name for himself. Even I have trouble crossing blades with him. Well, this sounds great. I haven't had a good fight in a while. Urza answered, "You sound really confident in yourself." There was no disputing that reasoning. Urza thought amusedly, "I should be. Any mage worth their salts has to if they want to be part of Fairy Tail." She discovered during their brief conversation that he was more complex than first appeared. Naruto grinned and asked, "So what kind of magic do you use?" Naruto gave a hazy response, "I use Win's techniques." Urza gave him a suspicious narrow of the eyes. He smirked, and she didn't like it at all. Naruto shook his head, asking, "Is that it?" She nodded. He wanted to put on a show and amuse the audience. "If you want to know my powers, the best way to find out is to beat them out of me during the tournament." She had no problem with that. She also enjoyed doing it. Naruto laughed at the remark, saying, "I see. Well, you'd better be careful. Underestimating someone could be your downfall." The same could be said to anyone. Naruto waved his hands dismissively and said, "Well, it has been nice chatting with you. It seems the new pile of missions are in. Thank you for your time." She nodded and departed after saying her goodbyes, saying, "No need for that. If y'all want to talk then anytime's fine." He checked the time and saw that it was, in fact, the mission post-arrival schedule. He noticed that all of the fish his cat had ordered were gone when he looked to his side and felt a familiar presence on his head. Tayuya nodded and asked, "Are you done?" Naruto nodded and left the building, determined to see his ailing teammates. "Thanks for the meal. Now you wanted to introduce me to your teammates?" he asked. The apartment of Kana. Naruto questioned, "Lucky, what are you doing here?" He had just come to see how Kana was doing, so he was taken aback when the girl with the violet hair answered. She deadpanned, making Naruto feel foolish all of a sudden. "We're roommates. It would have been much simpler for him to recruit them if he had known that." The violet-haired teenager grinned and nodded, saying, "Oh, okay. Well, I never knew. I came to check on you guys. Can I come in?" When Naruto entered, he was taken aback by the space's enormity. It was roughly the same size as his room at home. The light lavender color of the wall's paint job essentially matched the color of the curtains. One of their large couches appeared to be a pulled-out bed. For easy midnight snacks, the kitchen was ideally situated next to the bedroom hallway. He thought it was very cozy. She gave him a smile and said, "Nice place. Thanks and please stay quiet, Kana's asleep." As soon as she finished speaking, their third teammate appeared through the back door. She was dressed in violet-colored underwear and a simple white t-shirt. Right now, Naruto would be blushing profusely, so he was suddenly relieved that Jiraiya had taught him self-control during their training trip. Because very few women in Konoha were able to look that good in just a t-shirt and underwear. Well, aside from Anko and Kurenai, who were obviously in their 30s. Kana, who was still half asleep, said groggily, "Naruto, what are you doing here?" Lucky gave her a sigh. Kana grinned at his consideration, saying, "I just came to check up on you too. I heard you were sick." She had woken up in the morning with a headache and a high fever. "Kana, go back to bed, you're still sick," interrupted Lucky, who had been trying unsuccessfully to keep her in bed all day. Sometimes the woman was easily stirred and restless. Kana smiled sheepishly, "Sorry." They arched their brows in interest at the remark. "I also came by to introduce you two to our new member." At the same time, the girls asked, "Where?" Both girls were confused when Naruto tapped the top of his head and laughed. When they mentioned a blue cat that they thought resembled Natsu's partner Happy, their eyes widened. Like Kana, the Exceed was half asleep from the drive home. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. My name is Tayuya." Suddenly, Lucky yelled, Hi." Her roommate was startled out of her daze. Her eyes remained wide, clearly unprepared for the arrival. Whoa, hello there. Name's Kana. Kana Alberona. I'm Lucky. Lucky Oilieta. It was hilarious because Naruto was aware that their responses were expected. The teenager with the violet hair tried to strike up a conversation by saying, S.So. In an apathetic tone, the Exceed asked, "Do you two like music?" Yes. They both responded simultaneously, albeit perplexed by the question's nature. When they replied, Tayuya smiled thinly. Naruto sighed, realizing that she had nothing else to relate to. "Then we'll get along just fine." "Well, it's getting late. Before I go, I'm gonna tell you guys that I entered the Mage Mash tournament." Kana laughed. The blonde nodded and said, "Aiming for the top already, huh?" Naruto grinned at her as she laughed and said, "Good luck with that. Well, if you excuse me, I'll be catching up on my sleep." She said, "Night," and shut the door. He was about to depart when he recalled a long-ago statement made by his master. "Well, I'll see you two tomorrow." He took out his gourd and spilled a drop of his dragon sake into a water bottle he carried. Lucky nodded and made their way to their room, saying, "Give this to Kana, it'll help her go to sleep." He silently closed the door behind him and opened it to go, hoping his teammates are doing well. Magnolia Streets. Half an hour later. The blonde said, "So, what do you think?" Tayuya honestly responded, "They're pure." She had been watching the two during their meeting. The two things she was looking for were only visible through eye contact. Either someone who was kind and pure because of their everyday life, or someone with a troubled past and a grieving soul behind a facade of happiness. At her response, Naruto let out a joyful sigh. Tayuya cocked her head in perplexity and said, "Good. I plan to keep it that way. Not sure, unknown time." There was a great sigh. In any case, it would seem enormous to the average human. A loud voice said, "So you finally decided to show up, huh?" From the top of what appeared to be a king's meeting room. The entire space appeared to be a Wallace Tower, with seats carved from what appeared to be Greek marble. Huge pillars held up the entire structure, and the location was what people would refer to as heaven. The heavens. A few people in the back laughed at the smug and totally unnecessary response, "Sorry, I was busy, you see." Blue and black eyes clashed fiercely, staring at one another for a full minute before giving up. The dragon grinned at his superior, and said, "You never change, Tridantes. And you're as pompous as ever, King, not sure. It's not always pleasant to be in the dark. It frequently has the power to obscure someone's vision, alter their thoughts, influence their choices, and ultimately lead to their destruction. This is intended both literally and metaphorically. Whether for good or bad reasons, humanity has always had a sinister side. Justice is frequently abused and used as a justification for immoral actions. Since the beginning of time, people have been committing crimes under the guise of justice, which can only be described as the fools of the litter. But not for these individuals. No, these guys are just plain bad. Not a good intention in sight for any of them. Three individuals sat in a room that could only be described as dark and gloomy. They were all unrivaled masters of magic and had once been hailed as the greatest mages of their eras. Their faces were effectively obscured by darkness, making it hard to see their expressions. The room had a medieval feel to it, with weapons on the sides and a large round table that resembled a map of the world. The room was lit by dim candles. One of the men, with black hair and brown eyes that were full of life but also full of fear and uncertainty, walked in, his steps trembling slightly. "Have you found your target yet?" the middle one said in a spectral voice that made the man's body tremble. He composed himself and answered with assurance. "Yes, sir. Yes, the one you're looking for is in Magnolia right now. What orders do you have, sir?" There was a small pause indicating that the man was thinking of a solution. As the minutes dripped by, he grew more and more nervous. The sheer aura of the three in front of him were nearly suffocating his very being. "Get the Valkyries to come. That man will not leave Magnolia alive." The messenger nodded and walked out of the room, letting out a sigh of relief before collapsing to his knees in shock. The mere sight of them exhausted him, and he could only imagine the unfortunate people who stood in their way. The other three were back in the meeting room, talking about their current mission. "Should the Valkyries be sent?" A voice from the right said, "You know just as well as I do, that they stand no chance." The voice was deep and somewhat feminine, but it was very hard to tell. "I am aware. Do you doubt my intentions?" That was the other man's response. Though it didn't matter to her because they all had the same goals, the woman sighed, tired of being in the room already, and had better things to do than to sit in one room with this old man who seemed a little chaotic. She abruptly disappeared into thin air, leaving hardly any trace of her presence, and the man in the center heard a sigh coming from the right. "Do as you wish, Hades. Why did you ask me to come back here? What a waste of time." The annoyance was evident in the voice of a man. "I'm sorry, brother. I just wanted to make sure that everything went smoothly." The other man shook his head, almost disapprovingly. "I needed to talk to you about our strategies." "Is this man really worth the trouble?" "Yes. Ivan Draher has crossed us for the last time." Fairy Tale. Naruto vs Evergreen Luxus vs Natsu. Bixlow vs Urza Grey vs Mira Fried vs Gildarts. There were no bets on Gildarts' matches because everyone assumed he would win right away, which didn't offend Fried in the least. Even Fried believed he had no chance, but Gildarts tried to reassure him of his abilities by saying that no one was invincible. The official matchups were displayed on the top of the mission board, and as soon as they were announced, everyone began betting on who would win. "This is how it's going to work, alright guys." The master looked at Naruto, who gave him a grateful look, and said, "Well, you bums know how it works, but for those who don't, I'll explain." When GFW was mentioned, Naruto's face became confused, but he dismissed it when the master gave him a "I'll tell you later" look. The Mage Mash is a once-a-year, mini tournament that is meant to, in a sense, copy the GFW. 5 days from now, it will take place at night, with the first round matches starting at approximately 7 o'clock. No one paid attention to Naruto's fleeting, gloomy grin as they all nodded, waiting for him to continue. You guys have to be there in time or risk disqualifying. The guild laughed when someone said, the first round has a few rules but thankfully they're not too restricting, so be thankful ya crazy bums. There are only two things worth mentioning. The first is that you are not allowed to use forbidden magic. The mention of forbidden magics piqued his interest a little because, although his teacher had told him about a few, he had never heard of blood magic. For instance, blood and death magic are prohibited, and if you are caught, you will be sentenced to imprisonment by the council. He mentally sighed at the dragon's antics, thinking, Tridantes probably didn't deem it too threatening to tell me, huh? When the Makarov went on, he snapped out of his muse. The second is that the matches will be limited to 25 minutes, and if there is no winner by knockout, there will be judges to determine the winner. Naruto raised his eyebrows. How is that going to turn out? The master gave a sheepish smile. Well, it doesn't occur very frequently. On the other hand, the guys grinned inwardly, all thinking the same thing. The last time a decision had to be made was when Mira and Urza were duking it out last year. The two had the grace to blush at that mention. It was a lengthy match, with clothes being torn, words being exchanged, anger erupting, and the end result being two naked teens on the ground. Perverts watching were quite pleased that day. Best match in history. Naruto became increasingly interested after observing the men's expressions. The blonde had already figured out what those faces meant. They were thinking very Jiraiya-like thoughts. Damn, I should have come here last year, he said. In any case, if there is a decision, it will be made by the 3 council members who will be judging. Naruto nodded, seeing the reasoning. The winners of the first round will obviously go to the finals, the short elder said after pausing for a moment to catch his breath. Naruto, who was clearly the one thinking that, tilted his head. I know some of you are thinking along the lines of, it would be unfair because someone will get a bye round, but that is not the case because we have fairy tale or what people say. Extreme. The master appeared to have something prepared because he smiled mischievously as soon as he said that. The blonde was getting impatient and wanted the man to start right away. Instead of having 3 rounds with one person having a bye, I have come up with a different solution. Actually, my old teammate came up with it to entertain the crowd. Naruto's eyes widened, clearly not anticipating that. His plan was to make the tournament with 2 rounds. The winners of round 1 will be put up against each other in a free-for-all fight. A 5-man, woman rumble, you could say. His body shivered at the thought, and his startled expression changed to one of pure excitement. Naruto waited for him to continue, saying, one more thing. This fight is kinda special. In a way. You see, it is actually the semi-finals. When a mage is deemed unable to fight in this round, there will be a 5-minute intermission whenever one goes down. After the break ends, the cycle will continue until 2 are left, as you can see. When it comes to that, a 10-minute break will be held so the competitors will have time to rest up. That is considered to be the true finals. It wasn't as complicated as it seemed, Naruto thought. In essence, they engage in a 5-way fight until only 2 remain, and those 2 represent the conclusion. He let out a breath. Wow. Makarov smiled and said, yeah, I had the same reaction. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Damn right it does. I love it, he exclaimed, to the cheers of those behind him. Everyone nodded, then dispersed to do whatever they were doing. Yup, so be ready. It's on Sunday. Naruto left the guild to go home and everyone else continued with what they did. The roof of Fairy Tail 30 minutes later. Since the master allowed them to take S-ranked missions, the Raijenshu have formally established this location as their meeting place. Fried was the only player on the real level among his teammates, despite his peers considering him to be S-rank. Despite his cleverness and wit, Evergreen lacked the strength to be placed on S's level. Same with Bixlow and his Puppet Souls-styled magic. The masked man, somewhat offended by his friend's lack of faith, snorted back, Ahaha, I feel sorry for you too. Bix, you have to fight the Titania, Urza. Please, I can totally take her. Yeah. Shaking her head at his arrogance, she looked at Fried and almost pitied the man. At that remark, Bixlow fell silent, feeling sorry for his leader and his bad luck. Fried, you will be facing Gildarts on the other hand. Fried waved his hands dismissively and laughed. You two will eventually fight him anyways. Not like it matters, Gildarts will be the winner. It's obvious to everyone around. He replied calmly, without missing a beat. Evergreen shook at that thought. She didn't want to be the victim of Gildarts' crash magic. True. Hey, do you guys know anything about that Naruto kid? He's my first-round opponent. Bixlow chuckled. The glasses. Wearing woman grinned at the remark, feeling her confidence rise. Why? You worried? He's just some rookie that came here a month ago, you shouldn't have too much trouble? Fried sighed at her. She was even more conceited than Bixlow. Yeah, you're right. I mean, he's just some kid, right? Fried said. Since he was the most tolerant of the three, he was happy that Luxus had elevated him to the position of leader. She flushed at Fried's assertion, aren't you the one who scolds others about their arrogance? In satisfaction with the response, Fried nodded, why? Yeah, you're right. I'll take him seriously. As if waiting for him to go on, the woman gave him a questioning look and said, you better, he's much better than he lets on. Fried gave her a headshake. At that point, they were all perplexed. Luxus only said to be wary of him, however, they would heed their boss's warning to exercise caution. None of them knew how correct Luxus was, in fact, they had no idea. Funbari Onsen, the location of Naruto. Nothing calms the mind and spirit more than an onsen after a long, exhausting week. He instantly enjoyed the water's ideal temperature. It was neither too hot nor too cold for his preferences. All the muscles in his body were being relaxed by the bath, almost putting him to sleep. The blonde grinned upon hearing a moan from his friend Tayuya, who had also grown fond of the location. Without even looking at him, the Exceed grunted and turned away, saying, you know, this is the men's side, Tayuya. Naruto laughed when he said, I'm a cat, not a human. I have no interest in seeing what human females would. He was still joking, after all. Tayuya nodded in agreement, saying, geez, I was kidding. Man, I love this place. It's so peaceful. With the sounds of nature all around and a little waterfall to soothe you, she thought the location was pretty great as well. Heaven was here. Unfortunately, the cost is high because Anna Dono is very strict about rent payments and claimed that I was a cheap freeloader that persuaded her husband into making my stay here free for 6 months. Asakura Anna, the landlord's wife, was frequently in charge of collecting rent from paying customers. After hearing the agreement Naruto made with her husband, she was understandably upset about the deal but accepted it. The woman scares me at times. The Exceed laughed at the memory. You ought to be getting ready for that competition, right? Even though I hate people, I think some of them are really strong. Naruto shook his head. No, I've long since perfected my magic technique. Tayuya raised her eyebrows at the assertion. A master. It took years for one to be a true master at what they did. Tayuya had thought. The only thing I have trouble with is the final technique my master showed me, and I highly doubt it will ever come to that. Pardon my directness, but I don't think you're telling the truth. How on earth is it possible for someone your age to be a master? Learning magic takes years. Naruto laughed. The only masters I've seen are Makarov, your current guild master, and the ancient dragons of old. I had a great master. And could you tell me the name of your teacher? Maybe I know him. Even though I might not appear it, I used to travel the world a lot as a bard. Naruto gave her a flimsy smile. I completely agree with you regarding the bard part. You really enjoy music, don't you? She smiled with pride. I see no harm in telling you, but you have to keep it to yourself. He took a deep breath and grinned. I want this to be a surprise to everyone, she said, nodding and waiting for him to continue. Her eyes widened significantly as she said, my master was Tridantes, the traveler of the night and the real dragon of the west. She was surprised not only by the name but also by the dragon's reputation. As a bard, she had heard countless stories about the dragon of the west, including how the powerful creature would descend from the night sky and tear apart fools who dared enter his domain, how his roar would claim many lives from the killer intent alone, how he would flap his wings and blow away buildings with hurricanes, and how he would control the shadows and use them to wreak havoc on his opponents. The stories of Tridante were frequently used to frighten young children to sleep, such as, don't stay up too late or Tridantes will come eat you in your sleep. And the children would believe them, so you could understand her surprise. He waved his hands at her face, observing her astonishment, saying, hello. Are you awake there? Astounded, he said. You're familiar with Tridantes? She asked rhetorically, and Naruto nodded. Although she found it difficult to believe, she could hear the honesty in his voice. Are you aware of the extent of that dragon's fear? Never in her life would she have thought that the fabled dragon would have a pupil, the Exceed cried in his face. Nope, he is feared but annoying. Well, perhaps. He destroyed me where I stood in the one serious battle I've had with him. He spoke with respect and admiration, saying, I was a fierce warrior before I met him, and even with all my might, I only managed to push him past his first restraint. I wouldn't have changed much if I hadn't used my demon cloak. Once it wears off, the technique renders me helpless. I was conceited and assumed sage mode would be adequate. How could I have been wrong? As his hands involuntarily massaged an invisible scar that the dragon had given him for his efforts, he thought, even though it had healed long ago, he could still feel it. A dragon can only be harmed by anti-dragon attacks. The only technique that hurt him was Rasen Shuriken. In addition, I struck him with it twice. He now possessed the ability to defeat dragons, but he has never understood why a dragon would teach a human how to slay its own kind. They don't mince words when they say that only dragon slayers are capable of doing so. How many shackles does he wear? When Tayuya eventually recovered from her shock, she asked. Well, Tridantes only uses 3 restraints. I nearly forced him to his second, but I managed to push him past his first. After giving it some thought, he replied, he's much too strong for me to battle. To push a dragon like him, you must have had strength. He is regarded as being on the highest level in relation to the other dragons. Grandine the Sky Dragon, Igneel, and Fire Dragon are the only ones that come to mind that can compete with him. If you put in more effort in your training, you could defeat him. Naruto shook his head. No, if he were truly serious, I would have a hard time defeating him. In all honesty, I don't believe that any human being on the planet can defeat him fairly. Even I, who was known to possess an unusual amount of magical energy, was astounded by the sheer amount of energy he possessed. Tayuya nodded in agreement. Well, you are correct in most of your observations, except one. Naruto gave her a questioning glance, in anticipation of her response. He was initially perplexed before realizing, there is a human that could defeat him. Fortunately, he's been gone for years. Oh, I didn't think about him. The ancient Zerif. It took some time to persuade his master to tell him about Zerif, but he eventually did so by exchanging stories, and the blonde shuddered at the tales he was told. Rewind. Zerif? As he turned from his student to the night sky, Tridante's mind was filled with memories of the man named Zerif. The bloody sieges he led against the council and their armies, the living demons he called forth from the underworld that had utterly destroyed the cities, the thousands of corpses he used as ingredients for his spells, and the number of humans he killed. Even for a dragon like him, it was a terrifying sight to witness. Tridantes grinned and turned to the man he saw as a friend and student. Naruto had more potential than anything, whether it be human, superior, dragon, or demon. Zerif of old, the Dark Wizard, was the strongest mage in Fiore's history. The dragon looked at the blonde and said calmly, he was the supreme master of all types of living magic, a forbidden art. Naruto, who was always interested in stories, waited for him to continue. How did he behave? He was a real monster to see. The man had once been the world's most powerful mage's pupil. Nobody knows how or what happened, but Zerif killed him. He lived through the many days of the battle. Using his master's staff, he launched attack after attack on the Magi Council. The current fairy tale master, Makarov, valiantly lost after battling him to a standstill for 6 hours. Fortunately, 9 additional mages showed up in time to assist him in fending off the man. They succeeded in pushing him back and confining him in a secret prison. Following the great battle, those 10 mages were given their own guild and given the title of Saint. A few people have passed away over the years, but the title of Saint endures. Naruto's face was filled with awe, and he had a foolish smile that betrayed his excitement and gave the impression that he was going to burst. He nodded and said, wow. That is definitely going in my top 5 favorite stories of all time, right next to the 4th Hokage sealing the Kyuubi and the rise of the 7th Hokage. Naruto was known for boasting about his ascent to fame, but he usually avoided discussing his early years to avoid coming across as overly angsty and depressed. In addition, nobody would be able to relate to the plight of a Jinchuriki, so there was no use in telling anyone about its horror. Only a Jinchuriki could understand the loneliness of a Jinchuriki. No words could ever fully capture the feeling. At his student's statement, Tridantes burst out laughing. That story is legendary in Fury. You keep telling me about this Hokage. Why don't you tell me more? He said gravely, we made a deal. I tell you one story, you tell me one. Naruto grinned brilliantly and got ready to tell his own story. The world's most formidable shinobi was the 7th Hokage, whose name is unknown. He was unrivaled in his awesomeness, legendary in his might, and able to make crying babies laugh with a joy that only comes once every 10 years. Despite being a lonely orphan growing up, he never once let that stop him from realizing his dream of becoming Hokage. He fought relentlessly until he succeeded, determined to prove those who had wronged him. He battled and defeated one of the 9 great Jinchuriki, the legendary demon containers, when he was 12 years old. Even though the fight was drawn out and brutal, he went all out to save his loved ones by enlisting thousands of clones to fight alongside him. He mounted his own enormous horse and battled the demon to a halt for a considerable amount of time after the Jinchuriki changed into a giant tanuki. As a young hero, he returned to his village after the 7th emerged victorious in the battle. However, that was just the beginning of his ascent to prominence. He has defeated armies that dared to stand in his way of success, saved priestesses from demons, and rescued princesses from evil. He realized his early aspirations of love and respect by the age of 17. His village prospered during the 6 amazing years that he ruled. Indeed, he wept at his own story. He didn't tell Tridantes that it was actually him, but Naruto had a feeling the dragon knew anyhow, and it wasn't too hard for him to piece things together. The economy bloomed beautifully and peace came, he concluded, wiping away his tears. What a fantastic story. You ought to write a book. With an ear-splitting laugh, the dragon answered. Well, it has been on my mind. A story for a story, isn't it? The dragon gave a nod. Indeed. End of flashback. So, what are you going to do? Breaking Naruto out of his recollection, Tayuya asked. Well, the Exceed sighed in frustration at her partner's propensity to nod off. With a sheepish smile, Naruto said, the tournament. Don't worry about it, Ma. I only consider Luxus and Gildarts to be a challenge. Despite her strength, Urza cannot compete with me. The same is true for Mira and everyone else. I have the best defense against both magical and physical attacks, he said with assurance, exuding awe. Is that so? Naruto confirmed with a nod. Wait and see. Just because it sounded cool, I don't call myself the Dragon of the West. After a few days. Day of the tournament. As he calmly made his way to Fairy Tail, Naruto was thinking about the file he had read about Gildarts and was completely perplexed by the ambiguous description of his magic. All it had said was, crash, and he spent several hours considering his options before coming to a standstill. How in the world does crash magic appear? To himself he murmured. Oh, already planning ahead. He turned to see one of the guild's less well-known members, Macau, who was an expert in fire magic and transformations, after hearing a voice say something next to him. You're Macau, huh? What's up? Could you tell me about you? With a smile, the blonde answered. The blonde rubbed the back of his head sheepishly as the older man said, well, I heard you talking to yourself and I thought I could help ya. You heard that, Ma? Yes, I suppose I could tell you. Gildarts can destroy anything with his crash techniques. Yes, it's a little ambiguous, but better than nothing, isn't it? Naruto thanked him with a smile. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind. No issue, but don't get too optimistic. Kana told me about your wind magic, but it won't be sufficient to defeat him. Additionally, he was taught not to underestimate anyone, even though he never experienced this issue. You have Evergreen in the first round, and she ain't no pushover. I understand. I'll make sure to watch, thanks, man. It'll be a good fight, I assure you. Naruto took off, and Macau laughed and shook his head. Young children. Well, hold on, I'm also young. Yes, 33 ain't that old, he reminded himself repeatedly. The start time is 2 hours away, Fairy Tail lobby. Yo Naruto. The blonde, who didn't feel the need to take any jobs for the day because he thought it would only exhaust him, was trying to get some sleep before the matches began. Kana, are you feeling better? She grinned and nodded. Yes, it was fantastic. I'm not sure what you put in it. He chuckled at that. His dragon sake was no joke. In addition to tasting fantastic, it was also an excellent medication. Thank you. I'll discuss it with you later. Lucky is where? She'll be here by the time the matches start, he grinned. That's fantastic. However, I'm really bored. Time goes by far too slowly. She laughed at her teammate's antics and gave him a pat on the back to try to please him. The blonde turned out to be a great friend and comrade who helped her out with many things. In addition, he was a heavy drinker. What are you going to do, then? After a few minutes of adopting a drinking stance, Naruto snapped his fingers in response to her question. She raised her eyebrows at him and said, we have a few hours, let's get a drink. Before the tournament, you're going to get wasted? Naruto dismissed her question with a wave of his hands and a laugh. He was confident, some would say overconfident, when he said, don't worry about me, Evergreen won't last 5 minutes against me. Is that correct? Kana had seen the woman with the glasses fight and found her to be pretty amazing, so she asked with skepticism. Naruto nodded without missing a beat, saying, it isn't surprising because you haven't seen me fight seriously before. This caught her off guard, but it wasn't shocking because whenever she had witnessed him fight, he always had a silly smile on his face that suggested he wasn't being serious. I have other tricks besides wind magic, ya know. All right. Though she was a little reluctant to believe his claim, it didn't matter. She would have to wait and see, just like everyone else. If you say so, she concluded loudly, having somehow imagined him winning. All right, let's grab a drink. He took her hand and pulled her to the guild bar. She thought cheerfully, how ironic, usually I'm the one that drags someone to the bar. She had discovered long ago that spending time with the teen with the whiskers was never boring because he was unpredictable, which was a wonderful thing. However, she questioned his potential for unpredictability and hoped he would be a surprise at the Mage Mash. 2 hours later. The local stadium. Naruto. The blonde woke up from his slumber when a voice spoke. "How are you?" He heard the master say. The old man sure was nice to care for such a trivial thing, in a worried tone. He lied through his teeth and said, "I'm fine, a little sober hee." He had been intoxicated for 30 minutes and had only just regained his sanity, so he was actually pretty tipsy. "Go ahead and fix this, damn fox." Even though Naruto had mastered his chakra, the fox still had to give him the power, so he didn't bother commanding it to heal the Kyuubi because he was asleep. Before turning to face the crowd, he reminded him, "Okay. Remember, you're up first." The night was lovely and ideal for a Mage Mash tournament. Everyone was there, the stars were bright in the candlelight, and he could feel Mistgun somewhere in the crowd, but he didn't bother searching for him because the masked man was likely interested in seeing how strong the blonde was. Welcome to Magnolia's annual Mage Mash, ladies and gentlemen. The city was packed, and everyone was there for the Mage Mash event, which was the most popular thing to happen since Mages. The tension was high, and Luxus looked at Gildarts with fire in his eyes, willing to prove himself as a great mage instead of Makarov's grandson. He had a huge shadow above him that he couldn't easily overcome. Urza also gave the taller man a quick glance and acknowledged his presence. She had not intended to enter this year, but she changed her mind the moment she heard Gildarts enter. Urza admired people who were strong and just, and Gildarts was extremely both. The red-headed woman turned her head and saw Mira trembling with excitement, likely struggling to control herself. All right, everyone, with the exception of Evergreen and Naruto, went to the sidelines when the master yelled, and everyone obeyed instinctively. Everyone was excited to watch the match because one of the competitors was a member of the renowned Reijenshu, and Evergreen was notorious for her eye and fairy techniques. Naruto was famous, but not nearly as much as the woman in front of him. A few criminals who were hiding in the shadows acknowledged his strength because the majority of his notoriety was dispermeated through the criminal underworld rather than the public realm. If not for one thing, Evergreen would have been extremely popular. "Are you intoxicated?" Naruto scowled as he looked at her and sneered angrily. "No." Everyone looked at him. Evergreen erupted in rage as he muttered pitifully, "I'm tipsy," and smiled, causing some members of the audience to laugh. She detested being undervalued, and it was even worse when a rookie did it. The Dragon of the West had taken its first victim, but the match was over before it began, and nobody in the crowd saw what was happening. Magnolia Stadium, there was only silence as the crowd watched the battle below, and nobody was able to blink because they were so stunned by what had just transpired. Evergreen, the crowd favorite, had been taken down in a matter of seconds, and Naruto had not moved or even flinched. Instead, he stood there composedly, if a little inebriated. The S-class mages who were watching widened their eyes in shock, clearly not anticipating the turn of events. Whatever became of Evergreen? The betting odds were completely in Evergreen's favor, and Naruto stood there without even trying to fight while Evergreen was on her knees, in excruciating pain from her own attack. Natsu asked, shaken by the development. Alongside them, Luxus scoffed, utterly disappointed by his colleague's lack of insight, but he couldn't blame her because she didn't know his abilities as well as he did. "I don't know," Urza replied, also taken aback by the scene. Everyone squinted as he said, "Just watch again, Natsu, maybe you'll learn something." "Ma, don't be so mean, Luxus," Gildarts said, sighing at the boy's impoliteness. "You know, he's not quite as experienced as you." Natsu's eyebrows shot up, still perplexed. But it was really ingenious. Who would have guessed? Gildarts thought, a dark horse in this tournament. His years of experience had allowed him to recognize the trick Naruto had used to place the woman on the ground, where she was at the moment. Rewind. Evergreen erupted in rage as he muttered pitifully, "I'm tipsy," and smiled, causing some members of the audience to laugh. She detested being undervalued, and it was even worse when a rookie did it. Wing magic. She saw that he was still not moving and was getting more and more irate by the moment, so she summoned wings from her back and flew into the air to gain the advantage. "You bastard. Don't undervalue me." Ignoring Naruto's sly grin, she charged blindly above him and quickly launched her signature attack. Gremlin from Fairy Bomb. She let loose a torrent of dust in his direction and watched with savage delight as she set them on fire. Or at least, she would have, had they not detonated beside her. She was interrupted when her dust somehow materialized next to her. She attempted to break her spell, but was unsuccessful because the bombs exploded right away, leaving everyone perplexed as they saw that the blonde she had targeted had suddenly been replaced by the dust bombs. He gave her a gloomy grin and said, "Ma, in the words of my old sensei. Don't let anger consume you or I just might turn your technique against you, Ms. Evergreen." Flashback end. He was going to be a rich man by the end of this, and he was going to get a flat screen after this or maybe a new couch. He could get an Xbox, but the PlayStation 3 was more appealing. Wait. Xbox has more games and they have that new NES. Naruto watched her fall and land on the ground with a thud sound. The audience's silence pleased him greatly, especially since he asked Chiyuya to put all their money on him since he knew everyone had bet on his opponent. "Hey." He snapped out of his reverie when he heard an irate voice say, and he waved and grinned as he saw her get up. "I'm happy you made it out alive. Wished to avoid a premature conclusion to the match. I am a fantastic crowd pleaser, after all. Isn't that correct?" He gave the crowd a thumbs up and shouted happily, causing them to all awaken from their apathy and begin applauding him. "Yeah." Not noticing one of their blushes, Naruto bowed comically and blew kisses in their direction after hearing Kana and Lucky scream from their seats. It was easy to miss when every girl in their vicinity blushed as well. "What did you do, exactly?" she questioned, barely able to stand, having never been struck so severely in 5 years, and by her own assault, at that. It was a disgrace to her abilities, which she had developed over years of preparation and hard work. He cheekily said, "Why don't you try again and you might see what happens." She knew it was a trap and chose to learn his tricks later instead of falling for it. "No matter," she said with a seductive smirk, taking off her glasses to reveal her dark eyes, and Naruto raised his eyebrows and grinned naively as he recognized her gesture. "Oh, I see. You missed my trick because you were preoccupied with my good looks. It's okay. Additionally, it's easy to fall for this." The blonde made almost every civilian girl squeal with joy when he raised his arms to the audience and showed off his biceps. The master smiled at the blonde's ability to please the crowd and simply applauded him mentally for the show, while Natsu and Gray were rolling on the ground laughing while holding their stomachs to ease the pain they were experiencing. Gildart simply chuckled and shook his head, amused by the boys' antics. Evergreen flushed with anger and surprise, causing Bixlow and Fried to laugh silently on the sidelines. Urza and Mira laughed at their comrade's total embarrassment, while Luxus simply smirked at the effective taunt. However, they also harbored some pity for Evergreen. Chiyuya simply rolled her eyes at her partner's performance, but she had to admit that Naruto certainly knew how to get the crowd going. Lucky and Kana simply laughed in the crowds, as did the rest of the guild, who were all smiling like fools. "No. Stop talking and meet my eyes," she shouted angrily, trying to ignore the wolf whistles and calls from the crowd, who clearly misheard her. If at all possible, Naruto's smile widened even more as he blushed mockingly at her and pressed his fingers together in the manner of his longtime friend Hinata. "Oh, what audacity! I didn't think you were that kind of person, my dear. I must admit that you were very erratic." She was beginning to lose patience, and it only got worse when she heard Bixlow laughing aloud. She told herself, "Calm down," and looked into his eyes right away. To her delight, he froze still and started to petrify. She had retaliated against him for humiliating her in this way, and the crowd's silence made her smile. "A dujutsu, eye technique. Huh? Didn't expect that." Evergreen heard a voice behind her, and although she didn't want to, she had to turn around to make sure. She was shocked when she slowly turned her head and saw the blonde grinning broadly and calmly at her. "Not bad, but I've practiced eye techniques a lot." He pointed to the one she had previously petrified and watched it vanish into thin air. "Such a thing won't work on me, Ms. Evergreen," he said. "What? My preferred method." With a proud display of the move that had won him thousands of battles in the past, he said, "Kage Bunshin, Shadow Clone." He kept track of her with radar. Like efficiency by using his magic to send vibrations through the air while avoiding her terrified stare. "Shikamaru, thank you." Lee. He learned this move from his two friends in order to combat Uchiha Sasuke's Sharingan. Evergreen, determined not to be a sitting duck, launched herself into the air once more and attempted another of her attacks, charging him with lightning speed from behind. Leprechaun, Fairy Machine Gun. In an attempt to beat him instantly, she raised her arms, brought them down in a X, and unleashed a plethora of magical needles. Naruto sighed at her predictability and twitched his arms slightly. Kage Isha, Shadow Projection. The blonde ordered the shadows to protect him with a dome-like figure, and as soon as the needles reached him, they were immediately drawn into the emptiness. Evergreen's eyes widened once more. "It's Ju." Same like the previous time. He swiftly put an end to her thoughts, pointed behind her, and opened the other projection door, causing Evergreen's own attack to fly in her direction. Unable to dodge it, she braced herself and took the blow, When it was over, she fell to the ground without a word, and nobody was surprised when she hit the ground. Makarov chose to call the match after glancing at the girl who was immobile. Uzumaki Naruto is the winner. He received thunderous applause. The blonde approached her, picked her up, and took her to the stadium medical center because it was the least he could do after using such tactics to win. It's not her fault. Someone at her level couldn't possibly defeat me during the night. On the sidelines. What? Natsu said aloud. I still don't get it. Luxus fought the impulse to slap the rosy-headed child for his lack of observation, while Gray was also perplexed because he had failed to understand the method Naruto had employed. Gildarts, however, simply grinned. That technique was first used for teleportation, according to Luxus and the old man, and he is currently using it as a defensive counterattack. Using twice as much power, banish anything that enters the void and reroute it in the direction of the caster. It's somewhat similar to a mirror. This Cage Isha has a very fitting name for such a difficult move, Gildarts remarked, admiring the blonde's resourcefulness. Even though Evergreen wasn't even close to S-class, she was still strong, and the victory was lopsided. Naruto had only used 2 techniques during the entire battle, and he didn't appear to be exhausted at all, which was unnerving in a way. That was incredible, Urza murmured to herself. Winds? Darkness? He really does fit the name of the Dragon of the West, Mira exclaimed with delight, recalling the tale her master had told her about the mythical Dragon of the West, Tridantes of the past. Like most people, she didn't believe them at all because they were so fanciful, but Makarov was aware of this. Yes. Though he was the only one who noticed, Makarov's suspicions were confirmed when he said, his moves closely fit the descriptions of the ones Tridantes used in the stories. So, does Tridantes have a pupil? How shocking. Naruto, what will you do? How are you going to let everyone know that you are a dragon slayer? With a critical eye on the young blonde, the older man pondered rhetorically. Luxus exclaimed to himself, looks like we have another S-class. With equal excitement, the 2 fighters nodded and made their way to the arena. Oi, Luxus, Natsu, you're next. Infirmary, with Naruto. Shadow Projections Cage Isha is progressing pretty well. However, Dad's Hiraishin, Flying Thunder God, is still superior. I still can't keep up with his technique. Even when I'm at night. Naruto's shadow technique was initially meant to mimic the Yellow Flash's signature move. In a way, he used shadows for it rather than a seal as a medium. Despite his extensive knowledge of seals, his knowledge was still insufficient in comparison to his parents. Learning a seal required a lot of time and intelligence, 2 things the blonde lacked early in his shinobi career. The irony of it all made Naruto laugh, and his former sensei, Kakashi, would have been pleased with his own self-styled copy ninjutsu. I suppose I am actually a student of Kakashi. However, unlike him and Sasuke, I do not require a Sharingan. Eye techniques, or Dujutsu, are way overrated, Except, of course, the Rinnegan. Those eyes are like codes for cheating. The blonde had not anticipated that she would have such an eye technique in her arsenal, but fortunately he thwarted it without much difficulty. He felt a little guilty because she was fighting her natural enemy, but in reality, no one in the guild could beat him at night because he was nearly invincible when fighting with the darkness at his full disposal. The only people who could beat him now are Makarov, Gildarts, and possibly Luxus if the blonde had become careless, which was unlikely. I apologize, Ms. Evergreen, but I've encountered far more potent eye techniques, he said softly, erasing the terrible memories of the Mangekyo Sharingan and the terror it brought to his world, 2 of which had the power to take over the world and one that nearly succeeded. As he was about to leave, a plethora of shadows caught his attention. The silhouette reminded him of Enbu pursuing its prey to a corner. He shook off the chill that came over him and made up his mind to do something about it. He didn't know what it was, but if it made him uneasy, he would do it. Kage Bunshin, Shadow Clone. He called forth 3 clones to pursue the figures without even creating a seal. He grunted and left to tell his boss about the unexpected visitors. A powerful voice from above said, your student is quite skilled, Tridantes. The dragons were hosting their first formal gathering since a millennium ago, and although they frequently traveled the world covertly to carry out various tasks, everyone made plans to attend once Tridantes declared his return. He hasn't shown anything yet, haha. The lower-tier dragons made a mental note to avoid Tridantes' prized pupil at all costs, not wanting to provoke his wrath. Naruto had grown to such heights that most of the dragons in this room would be afraid of him, the Dragon of the West exclaimed, gloating every second about his pupil. HMPH, while your student is powerful, mine has far more potential. Tridantes turned to face Ignil, the fire dragon and brother of the king of dragons himself, who sent chills down the spines of almost every respectable fire mage. There is so much potential. You idiots only consider the possibilities. The lower ranking Dragonkins were terrified by Tridante's ferocious roar. The present moment is what counts. You talk about the future as though it's predetermined. This has not stopped my student from rising to the top. Do you believe my student will be defeated by potential alone? With his magical abilities surpassing his limitations, the Dragon of the West spoke as though it were an order. You've always had a lot of passion, and my student's potential is far greater than yours. For this reason, I think my student will get stronger. Tridantes laughed hysterically, confusing everyone around him as Igneal roared back, suddenly erupting black flames from his claws. You believe that my student's potential is a hindrance? When Igneal nodded with a confident expression on his face, Tridantes asked aloud and laughed even harder. Then you're mistaken. A limitation on strength does not exist. Merely having skill or potential is not a measure of strength. The dragon was about to continue when a strong aura began to move in his direction. The Dragon of the West turned his head and saw a creature that even he hadn't anticipated. Zahaha, do you have to cause a scene whenever you visit? The only reason Zarif didn't attack the land of Dragonkins was because of the dragon behind him. A dark gray creature with wings that extended as far as tiny lakes, eyes that were almost completely pupilless, and a gemstone on the top of its forehead. Especially on something so stupid, Tridantes grinned. If it's not the Dragon of the Moon himself, then fine. You woke up when, Aphelion. I couldn't resist when I heard a commotion about the great Tridantes coming back. I don't want my brother to return uninvited right now, Aphelion remarked sarcastically. Tridantes retaliated with a growl. Yes, of course. Now, let's watch this boy do something. Given that he feels it is appropriate to adopt your name, I want to see just how strong this human is. The Dragon of the West grinned broadly. My title, that is, he might just succeed. Not everyone can claim to be the Dragon of the West, after all. The Stadium Makarov nodded and indicated with his hands that he would take care of it, saying, that's the gist of it. Naruto had informed him of the circumstances and requested that he get ready for them. Unaware of the precise nature of the issue, the master recommended a wait-and-see strategy. Naruto nodded and went back to the sidelines where the other mages were, saying, let's just see for now. Besides, this is supposed to be a fun little event. Don't worry too much, my boy. Like flies to a light, all eyes were on him. Since he no longer bothered to conceal his strength, the battle had increased their awareness of his magical level. The blonde appeared to have more power. However, Natsu, Gray, and Bixlo were taken aback because they had not anticipated him to be nearly as strong as he was. However, because of their superior insight, the S-class mages knew better. The tone of Myra's voice was amused as she said, good job, didn't take you to be a shadows guy though. Naruto laughed at the comment because he knew a lot of people would concur with her. Ma, I'll take that as a compliment. I didn't mean to use those techniques yet, but I wanted to save my energy. Fried pointed at the two who were fighting and remarked, that's a good idea because Luxus won't have too much trouble with Natsu. Eager to observe his fellow Dragonslayer's methods, Naruto watched him closely. Since he had only been in this world for a few years, Naruto had never met another Dragonslayer. Show me your power, student of Igneal, the stadium field. As he charged the older blonde with vigor, Natsu shouted, Karyu no Tekken, Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. As Luxus charged his magical energy, he sighed at him and clapped his hands together. Hekiriki, Thunderclap. The rosy teenager was startled and knocked back to his starting position by a strong, lightning-infused shell that branched out. Luxus gave a disappointed shake of his head. With a roar and a flash of lightning, he yelled, Natsu, Natsu, Natsu. Always so predictable. Come on, show me something new. Towards him. He drew his breath in and readied his signature attack, avoiding the attack by only a centimeter. On the sidelines, Naruto looked at the younger child and asked himself, could this be? Naturally, as a fellow Dragonslayer, he was aware of the impending attack. The stadium field. Karyu no Hoko. Fire Dragon's Roar. He exhaled a supernatural quantity of fire, which shot at Luxus with average speed. Smirking, the older teen leapt neatly out of the way. Not bad, but it's not good enough. He struck the ground, causing lightning streaks to emerge. Ryamon. Lightning Ripple. Natsu was hit squarely by the attack, which severely damaged him. Natsu blacked out and fell in a heap to the ground. Nodding, Makarov said, winner, Luxus Dreher, and motioned for someone to take Natsu to the hospital. On the sidelines, after seeing the fight come to an abrupt end, Naruto couldn't help but feel disappointed. The young teen's roar was slow and easily avoidable, which surprised him because he had expected it to be a little more effective. He found the idea somewhat appealing and thought, he does have potential though, but that won't be enough to defeat a real-life dragon. Maybe I'll train him up a bit after this. From beside him, Gray laughed, like always, but he felt sorry for his opponent. Luxus was clearly not going to hold up against some of the guild's best mages. In defense of his fellow Dragonslayer, Naruto said, "Ma, he wasn't terrible. But if you look closely, you can see that Urza was studying the blonde out of the corner of her eye as she said apathetically, I agree, in a few years, Natsu will be much better. But right now, Luxus has every advantage over him." With a silent sparkle in her eyes, she sighed and walked up to the stadium grounds. My turn. The stadium, the Titania. Urza Scarlet watched as everyone's eyes were on her as she walked down to the stadium with a grace that only queens possess. She was extremely well known in Magnolia and frequently served as an inspiration for all aspiring young witches. For some, her magic was a nightmare, but for others, it was beautiful. Her eyes were fixed on a single objective, and her hair fluttered about like leaves in a spring breeze. Triumph. Bixlow of the Ragenshu, her opponent, nodded and gave her a haughty grin. Ready, Bixlow? She asked. She was a little irritated by the look, but she chose to ignore it and instead crushed his skull to the ground. She was a strong woman with abilities that most men lack. Yeah. Get ready to eat the dust, girlie, you got no chance today. The crowd gasped, and the masked man received numerous glares from the local sorceresses. Not because of the looks from the others, but because of the one in front of him. Bixlow swallowed uneasily. With the exception of Naruto, Luxus, and Gildarts, Urza's eyes darkened significantly and she unconsciously generated a great deal of murderous intent, frightening out the majority of the competitors. With the same thought, those three simply shook their heads inwardly. What a stupid thing to say in front of her. With a sickening tone, she asked, so you think that because I am a woman, that I will lose just like that? Bixlow shuddered beneath her eyes. No, I didn't mean it like that. She rushed at him before he could finish, outpacing most Junin in speed. Exquip. Gingner. 1, she cried as she dashed forward, and a spear that seemed to appear out of nowhere and radiated only power poofed into her hand. The snake design on the dark blue pole appeared to extend all the way to the top. The blade had an exquisite design, was completely black, and appeared to have a silver lining that extended from the pole's mouth to its tip. Startled by how fast she was approaching, Bixlow immediately called forth his puppets to protect him. He tried to slow her down by having them shoot lasers at her from all sides, but it didn't work because Urza quickly got closer to him. With her eyes burning like a demon's, the fiery sorceress wielded the spear and lunged at the man with bullet speed, her face showing no signs of mercy. The masked man screamed in agony as Urza easily pierced his armor with the words, Zantetsuken, iron cutting blade, striking him in a number of locations, including the more delicate ones. Urza was delighted to see him start rolling on the ground and pleading for forgiveness. Makarov looked at the young woman's sly smile and shivered before raising his hands to end the match. The crowd cheered for the young mage, winner, Urza Scarlet. Only the men felt sorry for the men who had just been violated in multiple places. On the sidelines, the faces of all the men watching the game were pale. Some were planning to give him a well-earned vacation. Luxus. Some were simply staring at him with pure pity and amusement. Gildarts. Some were just looking scared. Gray. And some were even praying to Kami to forgive his foolishness, Naruto. Observing every expression, Mira laughed without showing any sympathy for the man in the mask. With a hint of amusement and dread, she said, that was entertaining to watch. She was pleased to see the chills that went down their spines. Still pale from the attack, Naruto muttered, yeah, for you, scary chick. Did you say something? Mira asked, turning to face Naruto, who quickly shook his head. With her eyes narrowed and a scent of murderous intent behind her, she began to approach him, making Naruto laugh uncontrollably. Gildarts hurriedly exclaimed, S.S.O., Mira. Chan, it seems you are up next. And the younger blonde next to him gave him a grateful look. Oh yeah. She abruptly forgot about Naruto and hurried to the stadium to await the start of her match. With relief, he said, Thanks man. Gildarts gave him a back pat. No problem kid, no problem. Neither saw the terrified expression on Gray's 14-year-old body as he walked down. Stadium field. Gray versus Mirajane. Begin, Makarov exclaimed, gesturing with his hands to begin the match. The woman herself could sense Gray's intense fear as he gazed at her. She glared at him with a sly smile that was full of murderous intent. He perspired icily as he reflected unconsciously on his time spent with his master. Her numerous lessons on overcoming fear and how to be at one with nature. Face it head on. His master angrily commanded him in his mind. The week before Deliora's attack, she had told him, "Fear is not a weakness, it's a detector. Use it." He lost the world's greatest master because he disregarded her advice at the time. He felt the world weighing down on him as he gazed at the woman in front of him. Despite her strength, she was not unbeatable. His courage returned to his body as he stared back. Mira gave the younger boy a sly smile. She hurried him quickly in an effort to get the fight close. "Not bad, Gray. Now, let's get this party started," she said. He swiftly pressed his fisted hands into his palms, determined not to allow that to occur. Ice make. Ramparts. Mira was stopped in her tracks when spiky ice sculptures burst from the grounds. She immediately collected a great deal of her own magical energy, unfazed by the development. Devil's right hand. Many who were unfamiliar with the sight were startled when her right hand abruptly changed into a devil-like feature. With a sly smile, she punched right through Gray's wall and ran back toward the boy. He shifted into a different stance, ready. Ice make. Shuriken. He formed a lot of stars in his hands and hurled them all at the ensnared witch. To Gray's surprise, she smirked and effortlessly swatted them all away with her transformed arm. She smugly remarked, "Demon skin is only second to dragon skin, you know." This caused Gray to change his attack strategy. He collected his magic, concentrated on the shattered ice, and reshaped it to his preferences. "Doesn't matter. I'll just freeze ya." Myra's brow went up as she became acutely aware of the ice all around her once more. Ice make. Prison. Gray used the ice at his disposal to create a complex cage with 4 sides that appeared to be carved in all directions. Gray lowered himself to his knees and smiled proudly at his masterpiece. It was his most effective trap method, and only a monster could take it down. On the sidelines as Naruto gazed in wonder at the ice encircling the battlefield, he remarked, "That kid is really good." Haku, who taught him the real way to be a shinobi, was the last person he faced who was a true ice user. Haku's methods were more delicate and effective than Gray's, which were ostentatious and potent. Nevertheless, the boy's talent greatly impressed the blonde. Indeed. Gildarts concurred, somewhat taken aback by his military wit. Urza attracted Naruto's attention by stating, "Gray has always been talented. His master, was named as one of the 10 saints after she passed away fighting the devil Deliora. His master had told him about Ur's fabled last battle, but he was unaware of her pupil." Urza, who had the same reaction when she learned from the boy himself, concurred, "Wow, I didn't know she had a pupil. Yeah, he's good but nowhere near his master yet. Look, the fight ain't over yet," said Luxus. They noticed that water was suddenly accumulating in Myra's hands. At the sight, Naruto's eyes grew wide. He was shocked to hear that it was uncommon for someone to extract raw hydrogen atoms from the atmosphere. Impossible. That's just like the Nidaime, he thought. He never imagined that he would meet someone who could do the same. Returning to the battle as she said aloud, "You've done good, Gray." Gray was perplexed by her tone. Compared to before, it was more serene and ominous. When she appeared to be in her partially changed state, he was startled. She had a lot of markings all over her right side, which seemed to go well with the skin change. "But this is the end," she said in a completely different tone, which greatly alarmed the younger boy. Mizu Perusa, water pulse. She condensed the water in her hands to the point of a cannon, then shot it quickly in the direction of the cage, shattering it and striking Gray in the head, knocking him back against the wall. Like a light, the younger boy fell to the ground. Out of simple respect, she reverted to her normal self and approached Gray, escorting him to the infirmary. The standing ovation was enormous because they had not anticipated such a strong fight, and they clapped at the woman's sportsmanship. "Not bad at all, kid." There was absolutely no expectation that Gray would fight. Winner. Mirajane. On the sidelines everyone respected Gray as much as they could because of the battle he fought. What can they say? Mira was simply superior to the boy, despite his heroic efforts. Even though she hadn't really given it her all, she had at least tried to fight. Suddenly, Naruto burst out laughing. Urza asked him, drawing the other people's attention to him, "What's so funny?" As though speaking from experience, he said, "Those two are definitely rivals. Natsu and Gray. Fire and ice. Bronze and brains." So cliché. It brought back memories of his own rivalry with a certain dim-witted duck-haired person. Hopefully, he thought, it won't end up that way. Even though Luxus sneered, it sounded like he actually cared. "Yeah, those little rascals just won't shut up at times though. Just a bit." The others agreed with the two and nodded. Urza turned to face Fried and grinned pityingly. "Try your best." This was the match in which everyone knew who would win. Stadium field. Fried versus Gildarts. Begin. No one had the courage to wager against the bearded veteran Gildarts, so there were no bets on this match. Even with Naruto's extraordinary good fortune, no. With his hands raised to reassure the other man of his skills, the veteran said, "Hey, don't look at me like that. Try your best, Fried." Conversely, Fried shook his head. Gildarts sighed in relief, not wanting to offend the other man's pride. "No, you are without a doubt going to win. But like you said, I will do my best." Nobody was aware of his awful predicament, which was severely beating everyone without offending them. He gave him a somewhat archaic thumbs up, saying, "Cool." With a nod, Fried instantly put magical energy into his hands and slammed them to the floor. From where his palms were, a multitude of letters and runes began to form, captivating the crowd that had never seen it before. As if laying out guidelines, Fried chanted, "Those who are in your circle and are older than 35 shall not be able to leave without your permission. Those who are within your circle shall not be able to cast magic." Fascinated by the man's magic, Gildarts chose to observe him while he worked. On the sidelines, it wasn't just Gildarts who found the enchantments fascinating. The magical ink and innumerable words were forming a circle. Naruto was vaguely reminded of his own sealing methods, which he had frequently employed against more formidable foes. The sage was captivated by the sight of its formation. "What is that?" he inquired inquisitively. Luxus was the one who answered. Naruto's eyes lifted slightly in recognition as he said, "Enchantments. They're Fried's specialty. He can write any rules and set them on the ground. Anyone within the circle must follow its rules or face punishment. Not even Gildarts can break them without consequence." "That's awesome." Naruto shot back, recalling it from the guild registry. He silently swore at his master for keeping him in the dark about it. Returning to the fight, everyone watched as both fighters were encircled by a full circle. Gildarts, who was already aware of the construction's secret, watched as Fried pulled out his sword, surrounded by numerous encoded words, runes. The long-haired man charged the seasoned mage with vigor, saying, "No magic will be cast when you are in here. It may not be my best enchant, but it'll have to do, and I can't have you being impatient now." He made a lot of lunges and slashes, but each time he missed by an inch. Gildarts appeared sluggish, but he was still more seasoned and could predict the sword's movement with ease. As the younger man attempted to outsmart him with his strategy, the guild ace grinned. When he had had enough, he snatched the sword with his bare hands and bent it with little effort. "He's preventing me from leaving and using magic. It's not a bad idea, really." Fried jumped back in alertness, his eyes widening. He gazed at his beloved rapier in disbelief and asked, How? It cost him an entire A-rank mission's worth of pay, but it was his favorite sword. Under the guise of ignorance, Gildarts attempted to defend himself by saying, Oh, sorry, was that expensive? I'll pay for it." But Fried sighed, knowing better. Placing his palms on the floor, he dispelled the barrier, returning both of their magic uses. "I thought this would work. But I guess I have no choice." Fried wasted little time in casting another spell. As Gildarts thought, cancelled it, he cried out, "Yami no Ikriture. Darkness. Writing of darkness. Darkness." As he saw his own body covered in many runes. When he underwent a takeover, he looked like Elfman and changed his body into a demon with horns and a powerful muscular build. He also developed white demonic hair. As Fried charged him, Gildarts said, unconcerned, "You've gotten better." With a simple flick of his hand, the fairy tale veteran casually pushed the demon. Enchanted Fried away as he came closer. Fried appeared to be instantly vanquished as the demonic form vanished. They were correct. Winner. Gildarts cried. On the sidelines, Naruto's only response to the fight was, damn. It was not only totally in control, but it had also displayed almost none of Gildarts' actual abilities. Even though he hadn't disclosed his actual Dragonslayer abilities, it was still crucial to be aware of your opponent's moves. It reminds me of Pain's Shinra Tensei. Almighty push, but the possibilities are all over the place. He let out a sigh of disappointment. With those words, Naruto departed, leaving the other S-class mages to debate among themselves. Well, looks like we got a 10-minute break. I'm gonna go see Kana and Lucky. The master entered after he had left the area. Makarov said, so it's Naruto, Luxus, Urza, Mira, and Gildarts, as he moved toward his strongest mages, omitting the blonde Jinchuriki. Luxus stood with his arms folded and remarked, yeah, should be interesting this time around. He saw the blonde walk out right before he walked in, so he said, definitely. Where's Naruto? Urza raised her voice. He went to see his teammates, Kana and Lucky. Without any issues, the mages all nodded and exchanged glances. Ah, I see. Anyways, how are you all feeling? However, the same was not true for their rivals. The elderly man grinned and said, "We're fine," and Naruto wasn't even sweating. "Why do you ask?" He gestured to the stands, and everyone's eyes followed. "I guess I just wanted this match to be a good one." The crowd is going crazy, as you can see. Only to perspire upon witnessing Naruto's struggle to escape his newly formed fangirls. They were totally fixated on him and were pursuing him like a dog in its bone. Gildarts laughed. With a smile, he said, "Well, after the show he put up, it's not too surprising." Everyone nodded. Indeed, the blonde was a great crowd pleaser. Luxus said without hesitation, "He's strong. I wouldn't be surprised if he was a dragon slayer. He acts like one." Makarov's eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean by, he behaves like one?" Luxus shook his head in response to her statement, saying, "He may be a little loud like Natsu, but he certainly isn't shy or headstrong. His brief act of intoxication. It makes me think of a sleeping dragon that is poised to attack anything that poses a threat." Gildarts laughed at Luxus's statement. If his magic is any indication, he's dangerous to approach. They all knew it was true, but a few people laughed when he said, "I don't think it was an act." However, Luxus is correct. In combat, it's challenging to approach him. Urza nodded in agreement, saying, "You'd need an attack that gets around his shadows, and not to mention he's very quick with his shadow manipulation. It appears that going up against him one-on-one will only be stupid." Everyone nodded, with the exception of Mira, who gave her rival a curious glance. "He's hiding something, and it's big." "Are you implying that you need assistance to defeat him?" she said, glancing at the girl with the red hair. "He does appear to have a lot of power." The man grinned and said, "He's definitely on the mid to high tier of S rank like Luxus." "No, that might be going a bit too far. Come on, he beat Evergreen herself for at least 4 minutes," he said, causing Urza to shake her head negatively. "No, he wasn't even making an effort." Mira nodded, having experienced the same thing. His magical power didn't even diminish, and it seemed like he just wanted to put up a show. "He isn't a punk, for sure. Kana informed me that he completed his A ranks with ease. Additionally, keep in mind the clues he has been giving about his power. Winds? Darkness?" she said, sending shivers of excitement down their spines. "He fights like that dragon from the old myths." "It's a very old story, in fact." Makarov attempted to add a scare, but it failed when Luxus began to laugh. "The dragon of the west, Tridantes, would descend from the sky and skewer anything that would trespass on his home. He would use his majestic wings to create numerous hurricanes and use shadows to sow seeds of destruction within the enemy ranks." To his surprise, the older man shook his head when he asked, "Aren't those just little ghost stories?" The air was silent, indicating that they were all deeply contemplating something. "I assure you, they're very real." Makarov smiled to himself. The blonde, still a little taken aback by the turn of events, said, I see. Well, break's over it seems." Makarov looked at his wristwatch and thought, "Well, what do you know? You're right, we were talking for a while." Yes, 10 minutes had gone by. "Get your butts down there and put up a show." Just 10 minutes prior, Naruto. A close examination of Naruto's position revealed a sigh of relief. He had just used Jiraiya's well-known transparency technique to avoid his new fangirls by a single second. Now the blonde was giving the old hermit his heartfelt thanks in prayer. Uttering phrases like, "I hope Tsunade Chan stops hitting you," and "I hope you got the harem you wanted." From his heavenly vantage point, the hermit was now jealous of his former pupil's good fortune. "They're gone. Now where are Kana and Lucky?" he said, carefully scanning the crowd. Noticing the brunette sitting next to a certain woman with violet hair near the top. With a grin adorning his features, he snuck up behind them and ordered the other guild members to keep quiet. "Boo!" came from where they were sitting, and when Kana and Lucky turned around, they saw Naruto laughing at their own stupidity. The locals laughed as she proceeded to slam his face against her elbows after gaining a tick. Kana gave him a mocking glare, which caused Lucky to giggle. "Damn it, don't do that in public." He smiled sheepishly. "Sorry it was my inner prankster." "So, enjoying the show?" he asked, his abrupt glare changing to a smile. She nodded and then gave him a quick shoulder punch. Naruto shrugged and gave a halting response, saying, "Yeah, Evergreen didn't look too well after the fight though. Why didn't you go all out?" "Dunno, didn't feel the need to." "Why do you ask?" Naruto laughed at the remark. "Well, you never go all out. I want to see my drinking buddies full strength, you know. And you never seem to fight seriously at all during missions. You just seem bored most of the time," said Lucky. Indeed, Naruto sighed. He simply didn't seem to like taking on weaker opponents. Well, it won't be a problem now. I'm in a match with all the S-classed fighters in the guild. They look tough, especially Gildarts. Dude didn't break a sweat fighting that fried guy. Don't get your hopes up, Naruto. You're strong, very strong, but Gildarts is on a level of his own. Even the master would have a hard time beating him at full power. The man became the ace of the guild when he single-handedly discarded 5 S-class criminals at once. 5 very notorious, very powerful villains, and all of whom were leaders of famous dark guilds. Naruto was only able to nod and think that way. With the amount of raw power that surrounds him, it's not too surprising. The man's like a walking beacon of pure power to my senses. Need I mention that he seems to have perfect control over it all? Geez. I wish I had that kind of control when I was a kid, he was thinking to himself. As his teammates gazed at him with interest, he said, "Don't worry too much about me, I have a plan." At the same time, they questioned, "And what's that?" He mentioned something else as a follow-up. "Well, I figure that Luxus, Mira, and Urza are all more interested in fighting Gildarts, so I'll just let them wear him out first. Then I'll jump in and kick butt," he said. "That, or I hope that he pulls a Shikamaru and gives up." "Haha, good luck with that. They aren't S-classed because they're just strong, you know. They'll figure out your plot." Kana laughed. When Naruto noticed that everyone was heading back to the field, he said, "Ma, we'll see." "Well, looks like it's time." He gave his teammates a nod, and they both wished him luck. Grounds, they all shook their heads at the question, "Need I explain the rules?" With special attention to the younger members, he said, "Then best of luck to you all." He turned to face the audience and projected his voice using a magic trick that enhanced it. His hands were directed at the resident blonde teenager. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the final match. A 5-sided super battle elimination match," he exclaimed. There were thunderous cheers, mainly from his fangirls, as they exclaimed, "We have our competitors. On one corner we have the Dragon of the West, Uzumaki Naruto." The resident blonde was embarrassed by the numerous squeals and marriage proposals that filled the air. There were more cheers, which made him smile. "On another corner stands our very own Luxus Dreher, the S-classed magician," he exclaimed. "And here we have Urza the Titania." This time, there were males whispering marriage proposals. Surprisingly, there were also some from the women. Mira Jane the Devil. The stadium began to stomp its feet in an attempt to heighten the fervor in the air. With the words, "And we have our one and only Gildarts," everyone stood up and began yelling impatiently for the competitors to begin. The audience became even more impatient as Makarov extended the statement, "And now." He brought his hands down to indicate the start, and the tension dropped as he waited for the perfect moment. "Begin. Fight." Naruto closed his eyes and grinned as he saw that everyone else was approaching Gildarts instead of him. In any case, he thought. Luxus threw a lightning bolt at him, and before he knew it, Urza had jumped him from a distance as the footsteps grew louder. Because the attacks were swift and effective, Naruto had to dodge them quickly. He kicked Urza back to give him some space after waking up from his daze and developing a tick mark. The speed of Naruto's attack startled everyone as she flew back towards the wall. A totally uncharacteristic. "What the hell? Y'all were supposed to attack Gildarts," he screamed. He was laughed at by Tayuya, who overheard his plan. Wincing at the slight pain she was experiencing, the red-headed woman stood back up and turned to face him. Urza and Luxus simultaneously asked, "What makes you say that?" His teammates in the crowd laughed as he pointed out like a monkey, "Well, you guys were so excited about fighting Gildarts. Now you're attacking me? Hypocrites, all of you." Urza narrowed her eyes at him and began, "Well, there was a little theory we came up back during the break." Luxus concluded with a sly smile as he noticed Mira coming up behind him, "And well, we agreed to satisfy our curiosity before fighting the big man." She said to him, "Ah, so is it true?" Unable to understand what they were discussing, Naruto became perplexed. "What? That you're a dragon slayer, a few minutes earlier, in the infirmary." "Come on, Gray. I want to watch the last match," the infirmary yelled. Gray was smacked out of his dream by a certain rosy-haired dragon slayer who had just woken up from his battle. He rubbed his eyes and said, "W. Where am I? In the infirmary. That means you lost. Ha 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 ha." Gray slapped the rosy-haired teen on the head and developed a tick mark on his head. He screamed back, unaware of the murderer's intent behind them both. "If you're in here, then that means you lost too, y'all idiot. Will you both shut up? I'm trying to sleep." Evergreen yelled at them this time. She plopped back into bed and slept soundly, content with their silence. "Crazy lady," Gray muttered, causing the person next to him to laugh. When the boy with the raven hair cocked his head, he noticed fried, another Ragenshu member, grinning down at him. Don't mind her, Gray, she is still upset over her defeat. Shut up. Natsu and Gray nodded and trailed the hobbling mage out of the room, saying, anyway, let's go watch. It should be getting started anytime now. They walked down the hall and asked, are you okay? They nodded in agreement as they said, don't mind me. I'm blessed to even be able to walk after fighting Gildarts. Fried was momentarily distracted by Natsu's innocent question, so who's in the finals? He said, Naruto, Luxus, Urza, Mirajane, and Gildarts. As they got closer to the bus stop. Like predators on prey, they observed Luxus, Mira, and Urza moving toward Naruto. They heard Mirajane ask, so is it true? With a hint of interest in her tone. What? The blonde asked. That you're a dragon slayer. Natsu was the one whose eyes widened the most in the stadium. Naruto glanced at her before turning to face Makarov. Naruto could only sigh in resignation when he saw his face. He reasoned that the secret was out. Urza shook her head and asked, what makes you say that? With the other two nodding, Mira said, your nickname and the way you act. Your powers as well. It all points to one thing. He closed his eyes and grinned, asking, is that so? The majority of the audience was shocked when he reopened them and saw that, like his master, they had gone from vivid blue to black with red slits. W. What? Natsu exclaimed, perplexed by the circumstances. Someone had just been accused of being similar to him. He sucked his breath in a manner similar to that of Natsu earlier, saying sinisterly, why don't I just show you? As soon as they saw this, alarms went off in everyone's heads, and they immediately leapt out of the way before the recently discovered Dragon Slayer could unleash a roaring amount of power from his mouth. Yoryu no Hoko. Night Dragons Howl.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.